after this. Are you ready, Jay?
I am ready.
All right, let's see what's going on.
Welcome to a special edition of WoWCast, where we're going to talk about a patch 11.1.7
there's Hans. Don't you miss
feature,
Dratnos?
and then a
Fucking
broader
traitor.
discussion about add-ons in World of Warcraft. in
I miss
general.
our boy.
I'm Dratnos, World of Warcraft content creator.
Jesus, Ian's lost a
I'm
ton
Max,
of weight.
I'm the
Looking
raid leader of
fire,
Team
Ian.
Liquid, the WoW Guild, and a content creator as well.
And I'm Ian Hazikostas, game director on WoW, and it's a pleasure to be here with you
Yeah,
guys.
shout outs to
Very
Ian.
excited to be here. So what are we doing in 11.1.7?
A whole bunch of fun stuff, but one of the features that we're extra excited about is a new UI option that we're adding called Rotation Assist, which is
Whoa.
really designed to help players who are maybe picking up a new spec or want some guidance
Wow.
on what abilities they should be using when, without having to turn to third-party add-ons.
Brilliant
for it.
idea.
So we've seen that, there's an add-on called Hekili that is very popular with a lot of players. We're basically building in a very similar version of that into the base UI that
No
you can
shit.
opt into. That will, no matter what DPS spec you're playing, highlight the recommended next ability given your current energy, what's going on around you, and so forth. One extra
Pause there. Initial thoughts,
Please.
Jay.
Okay, so, right. Bad take incoming.
Okay.
I actually feel like rotation helpers teach you a lot of bad habits, and I can understand that there are great accessibility features. I understand that MMOs can be confusing and overwhelming, but rotation helper add-ons, just especially Hekili, I think it's called, they do teach you bad habits because there isn't a foolproof way that you can press kind of the same rotation over and over again, because you have to kind of evaluate in the moment, especially if there's ads, you're going to be prioritizing different buttons. At Mythic Plus, for example, you might have a priority target. There are actually a lot of thought processes and decision making going into kind of what you're pressing when. It's not as easy as just pressing the same button in sequence or the same rotation in sequence. So, I understand that this can help people when the game is incredibly overwhelming and there are a lot of buttons. So for that reason, I'm happy for like people who would want to use it and get use out of it. But I really do think that rotation helper add-ons do teach you a lot of bad habits, and it doesn't actually help you in the long run. I'm sorry if that's a bad take.
No, I think this is probably way more nuanced than will go on. On the one hand, counterpoint to that, I cannot tell you how many people have come to me over the last few years. It numbers in the many thousands of people who have tried to come back to WoW, and it's just too complicated. They can't play it. Like, they try it for a couple of days, and they're like, there's a point of friction, certainly with wherever this is going, where certainly if you came back for Classic, right? If you came back for Classic or you came back for the Burning Crusade and then you tried to be like, oh, cool, but things have kind of died down there, you know what I mean? Like, the rating's done. And they go to, like, retail and they're like, what in the fuck is this circus that's happening right here? Like, this is insanity. And certainly if you have that point of friction, which is, oh, you want to play retail, you need this amount of add-ons to get going, right? You know, how many times have someone playing, they're like, we need weak auras, if you're even going to play the game, to track buffs, combat insight, stacks, all that kind of bullshit that, like, you have to make decisions on. You are absolutely correct, though. If you want to be good at this game, a rotation helper is not going to be for you, because you are not going to, like you said, damage amp windows. This is about to happen in a boss fight. You shouldn't be blowing your cooldowns here, because rotation helpers generally, I think, try and use your DPS cooldowns like when they're off cooldown, which is just a horrible thing to do. Like, that is generally horrible. It's a pitfall you can fall into. I would say this: if you don't give a shit, though, about Mythic Plus beyond the basics, or say even heroic rating, like you just want to kill mobs in the world, do normal mode, LFR, and you have no intention of ever going past that point, this is probably for you. Like, absolutely for you. Because you're never going to be in a situation where your performance is hampering your progress, right? You know, you can do normal mode with, like, one button spam. And for those people, it's great. I think your issue is one I would have if I was still making guides and I was putting a YouTube video on this. It's like, if you use this and you become reliant on it, you're fucked. Because I actually equate this to clicking. Because once you get into the habit of doing this, like you're saying here, like the habit of clicking, it's very hard to break out of that or break that muscle memory you've developed, right? Because rotation helpers can't read a situation, which is what you're saying, right? As somebody who's played in high-end Mythic Plus, it can't read or judge what's about to happen.
Yeah, it's even in raids as well. And I haven't played necessarily every single spec, right? I've only ever played mage, but there are a lot of times when you are making decisions in the moment and you're evaluating the tools that you have available, the knowledge that you've acquired of the spec, and you're kind of executing your rotation like that. It's not always as simple as pressing the same button or the same buttons in sequence over and over again. So yeah, sometimes rotation helper add-ons, they're not the most accurate, but what I will say, after being a negative Nancy, is that I do think that this is going to help players who are newer to the game. Because as I was saying before, there is, a lot when it comes to an MMO. It's a whole world. There are so many buttons. You've got hero talents, normal talents. You have all these things. And it can be overwhelming. So I think if you're in that position, having a rotation helper and just have like a little glowy button of confidence light up on your screen to help you kind of digest all the information on screen isn't going to be a negative thing. And I think if people are going to move up through the content level, you're going to be looking to get better anyway. So I think the people who are going to be using this are going to be playing at the level where it's not going to matter if they necessarily have these bad habits. I mean, you're still going to kill the boss, right? In LFR, people are probably pressing all the wrong buttons anyway.
Those guys are going to do more, right? Those guys are definitely going to do more because it's trying to get you where you're going. I've never used a rotation helper. I don't know whether it can even, does it recommend you should press your AoE finisher or your single target finisher, like a rogue's case or something along those lines? Or will you see people in your dungeons who are constantly using the single target finisher with 20 mobs around, right? Because that's what the button is lighting up. It'll probably light up both of them. One of these is fine. Or will they default to well, I always press this? Certainly for new classes, this is interesting. Let's see where he goes with it. But this is definitely a spectrum of issues and pros. I recently played the game. I don't know if you saw, but I played it with they built add-ons so that blind people can play WoW, actually visually impaired people. And one of the issues I ran into is I didn't know what my spells were. I could move around, I could find quest mobs, I could loot quest mobs, I could play the game and get an image in my head of what the area looked like, but I didn't know what my spells were or anything like that. And so that would be interesting. Let's see where they go.
Thing that we're also going to do, which maybe goes a bit beyond what the add-ons can do, is also have a one-button version of that.
What the fuck?
Where there'll be a keybind that if you just want almost an auto-rotation, you can opt into that, and it will just automatically cast the next recommended ability in the sequence. There'll be a small GCD penalty associated with that, but we want to make sure that this is for accessibility purposes, that it's there for people who maybe just honestly aren't interested in the gameplay of mastering their spec. They want to explore Azeroth and experience the story, and the mechanics kind of get in the way of that sometimes. This should be for them. Ideally...
All right, again, Jesus Christ, Jay, we now have a one-button macro that presses your buttons for you. I think our points are still the same here. This is for people who don't really give a shit about performance.
Yes, I think so. It reminds me a little bit of FF14, where with the rotations in 14, there is a very specific order that you press certain buttons. So they kind of just put those combos on just one button to press. It reminds me a little bit of that. I'm sure there are other games that maybe implement something like this. Again, I think, so my initial impression is just, and there's kind of a few negative thoughts in my brain. But at the same time, I'm kind of pushing through that because I think the people that are going to be utilizing this and using this are going to be playing in the level of content where that's fine. It's going to be an accessibility setting. I really don't think that people are going to take this high end. So it's not really going to impact people. And let's be real, when you're in LFR, people are not playing the game anyway.
No, one for anybody who's got a disability and can't be pressing a bunch of buttons, this is fantastic, right? You're going to be able to do some level of performance. And with a reasonable confidence, you're going to be fine, right? That's great for those guys. Again, the pitfall I see here is people becoming reliant on it. I can literally one button play the game like Path of Exile, and I win the content I'm doing. But if you do get that aspiration to move up a little bit, that's where you're going to hit that friction. I'm not sure how many people, though, in the modern era of retail World of Warcraft are in that position, though, because, there's very few people who go, certainly to Mythic, right, comparative to the player base. Very, very few people who go there. Where this would just be, you would be a disaster. Is it harder? I guess, Jay. The question is to move from like semi-bad habits of lack of consideration of the environment and what's about to happen, which we see. Obviously, we cast the race to world first. We see endless personal progression from those players from pull 1 to whatever it dies of maximizing their performance, and every key press matters. If you've had a basic understanding of your spells, like it should be slice and dice and whatever going on. If you're trying to move from a one button, but you're trying to move from one button to considering not only how a boss works, but now this, that's going to be a bigger mountain to climb for those people.
Yeah, I think the problem with the one button is that you're not necessarily learning anything. You're not getting familiar with your abilities, because usually when you keybind buttons, oh, that's going to be my Frostbolt button, and you get familiar with Frostbolt. But if you're kind of just pressing the same button, all of those spells, especially if you're new, are just going to blur into one. I do feel like you're not really going to learn as much about the game or as much about your spec. And I do feel like it can teach you, let's say worse habits. I think the analogy you used of clicking versus key binding is good. Like, you can make clicking work, of course, but it's always going to be more efficient to press a key bind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's always going to be the most efficient way to play. So I do think it's going to be one of those things. Yeah, I can't really see people taking this high end, but it does kind of inhibit the new player experience, because you do become reliant on just pressing the one button, like I said. And
Path of Least Resistance
you don't
is
learn
such
much.
a thing, right? Path of Least Resistance is such a thing that happens. I'm actually reminded of a different change that happened in WoW, which was the launch of LFD. LFD came into the game, and within 2 months, you wouldn't think it would be. You thought it was going to be popular, right? Because obviously you no longer had to like wait around for dungeons or go to cities and sort of spam for groups and things. I'll go to like the old meeting stones. I don't know if you ever. I don't think you played during that time, but you had to go for meeting stones, like click them at the dungeon itself in order to get a group. And then LFD came out, which is like you could just queue from anywhere in the world. But one thing that was an interesting side effect of that is within 2 months, we started seeing people who did not know where the dungeons were, because the Path of Least Resistance existed and they no longer could find the dungeons. So if you were doing something like the Nexus, which is a big story point of going to the Nexus in Caldara, and like, they died, right? So you have to corpse run back to the dungeon from the graveyard, is they couldn't do it. They literally, like, people would leave groups because they were like, I have no idea where the actual dungeon is, because I've never had to explore the world in any way, but they were using the Path of Least Resistance. That reminds me a bit of this, is if we will see people, I could see here a lot of people were during a more extreme boss having this keybind available. So if they have to do a lot of heavy movement, this bit stresses me out, is I default back to just pressing this button that's going to be doing something, because DPS on the move is a real skill that you need to pick up, with hundreds of hours of playtime, right, to do efficient movement. And if you can move around and just press this one button and default back to it, and it'll do something, even if it's not efficient. Is that an improvement in some way? Do you know what I mean? Is that better?
Yeah. So the way that I am taking this is it's more of an accessibility option, as
100%.
opposed to, again, I haven't seen anything, but I can imagine if there's a lot of talk or outcry about this, I reckon people's points are, we're making the game simple, or we're making the game easier. I don't think that this will I think it's literally just an accessibility option. I don't think that it is changing anything for the majority of people.
I disagree. I think you're correct. It's going to be it is designed to be an accessibility option. And obviously I just brought up that blind playthrough we did. If I had one button that was able to sort of pick and choose between these spells that I don't know what they are, this is a brilliant, phenomenal tool for that aspect of things, right? It's like, if I got difficulty with my hands or whatever my disability might be, this is phenomenal for those guys. I do think, though, this is something that is going to be used outside of that. I think that's where our fear is. Will it be actually an issue? I don't know, but I could definitely see people, like, if I could just mouse wheel this, because it's a button, right? Can I bind this to my mouse wheel and watch Netflix and never really look at my screen while doing whatever? that is something I'm going to do, and I'm never going to learn past that. I also come back to the point that I've made tons of times about people caring about what other people have. Do I give a shit that Tommy is farming his world quests with a 1-button macro? Like, there's no way, if you're in a higher end situation like High Mythic Plus or even Heroic raiding or Mythic raiding, somebody utilizing this tool is going to stand out like a sore thumb, and it's not going to affect you at all, right? I really don't care what the other guys are doing if you're using that kind of thing. So it's one of those situations that I feel like it will be used by people, but then it's not affecting me in any way. It's a point about bot farmers. I don't know. Blizzard will be aware of that, of what the bots, bots are going to be utilizing this tool, obviously, in some way. But the bots already kind of do this anyway. Like, it's not actually that big a deal for bots, I don't think. Bots already utilize full rotations. We've seen bot videos before. It's an interesting choice to add this. I wonder if they'll test the waters with it. You know what's interesting about the rotation helper and stuff, Jay, that you kind of touched on? How Blizzard is notoriously not great with keeping up with their own class changes in some ways. And it doesn't happen as often anymore, but often the stuff they put in as recommended is woefully incorrect because they've changed something. And it now no longer is right. And you're now actively potentially teaching people the bad button to press. I also wonder, I assume they've worked this in with hero talents. Like, if you're picking up Bladestorm or whatever, is that part, I mean, I have to assume that's going to be part of the rotation helper, is like you have this extra ability that isn't part of the standard toolkit, and how on top of that are they going to be? I'll be curious to see how, if people try this day one and they're like, dude, this is absolutely so wrong from what you should be doing. It's crazy.
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? I always felt like the amount of research that you'd have to put into your spec, say have to, I'm a sweaty loser, okay? So this is what I would do. But I would be constantly researching my spec. I'd be constantly looking through logs, constantly delving through like the class Discord, because things change all the time. Somebody figures out it's actually a DPS increase to do this instead of this. Oh, you need to stand this amount of yards from the boss so that your ice lance hits in a certain way before that spell, and like all of these things that people figure out. And you also have, buffs, nerfs, and now it's a DPS loss to press this button, or it's a DPS gain to do this, or now this is a priority. That changes on such a regular basis, and it's almost weekly. Sometimes I feel like Blizzard love the drama to keep things relevant. So it's like, yeah, your whole rotation's going to change week by week because we're just going to change stuff. Like, this tier set will get buffed, which means you no longer press this button.
Yeah, especially with certain
things change so often.
Again, I'm wary of us drifting too much to the high end who wouldn't be affected by this. Like, that's our perspective of like, yeah, I would not use this thing, right? I think, it's weird. It's one of those, like, I think the people who would utilize this and get benefit from this don't care, like, at all in any way. Do you know what I mean? But we'll see how that goes. My biggest concern so far is people getting lazy and going backwards almost. Like, I almost keybinded. I'm almost getting an idea for rotation. Oh, I could just press this one fucking button and it'll do 80% of what I need to do, and I'll never learn past that. Like, how many people read their spell tooltips? It's really small. Right? It was one of the big things I did in my guides was read the tooltips to people, because no one ever would and didn't understand what their spells did. If your button is just constantly changing from one spell to the other with just pretty pictures, do they know what a fucking Kingsbane does? Like, or should you just
press to kill stuff, not to read?
Yeah, and it's kind of important.
This is not a tool where someone is like being told by their raid leader to stop trying to DPS manually and just turn on the one button mode to meet some DPS check.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
That we want to give you the tools to kind of go through that organic progression.
You'd want to turn it off to achieve that.
Great.
But the rotation assist doesn't come with a penalty or anything like that. That's just we're going to show you what your next button is.
Exactly. Right. It's very similar to the Hakili add-on. It's kind of reflecting, just the latest kind of established theory crafting, and it's something that we would continue to update, with spec changes and class changes over time.
We'll see.
Ideally, it all gets born out of the idea that we've seen a valuable tool that players feel like they should be looking outside the game
Jay,
to download.
If you had to guess, just a quick pause here. This is something they've seen is fucking widespread. How many people do you think percentage-wise, if you had to do a rough guess, are already doing this, and like we all live in some ivory tower of like, well, I would never do that, I would never do that, but motherfucker, this thing is everywhere.
No, a lot of people do this. So when I used to do log and VOD reviews, the amount of people who were using Heliki was the majority, and the amount of bad habits I had to unteach just because the rotation helper add-on would tell them to do a certain thing, and I'd have to be like, no, you really have to unlearn this because this is not what you're supposed to do. And especially if you're in this situation, if you're seeing this and you say, like, if you have this many targets, like I had to undo a lot of that. But again, I don't want to sound too like,
no, I mean, but those people got
on a high horse or anything, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of those things, like in FF14 similarly, is like, oh, we're not using add-ons. It's like, motherfucker, everybody's using add-ons. Is a huge amount of people are probably using this, and rightfully so. I mean, I would point this out as my overwhelming thought right now. If we're at the point where like the game needs to add this in, I think WoW has gotten too complicated. Do you know what I'm saying? If it's a point where widespread use of the player base is using rotation helpers and things like that, and now the game itself is looking to add in this functionality to your own game, that WoW retail has probably gone too far in general. Because, like I said, it's been the #1 cause of feedback I've seen of people trying to return to retail WoW has just been the inability to be like, this is just too fucking much, man. There's like, I'm spinning like infinite plates. You know, I always compare it to a guy at the circus who's spinning fucking like 5 plates on sticks. It's like, it's just too fucking much. But if you're seasoned and you're playing it and living and breathing it, it doesn't feel that way because you've just grown with those changes. Do you know what I mean? You've grown with it and you've got used to it. But I think it might be discounted too often how many people try and come back and just have fun and they're like, what the fuck is going on with this game? I've got 25 buttons and they're all... Even I complain about the amount of cooldowns that some classes have. Like at one point, Warrior had like 7. That you couldn't even macro them. It didn't work like that. You had to like fucking 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I can start doing damage, right? If you wanted to do it in the right way.
Rather just reduce the barriers to that and make it available to everyone.
Okay, yeah, because there's 2 parts to it, right? Like the advanced is, I want to really go into this, is the 1 button thing, but that's not necessarily everyone that's going to use this. Like I think this game, especially new players getting into it, there's a lot going on within a particular class and you can be a little lost trying to figure out exactly what I should be pressing. So even just using it as like a guide to start learning your class and move off of it eventually, but just having a base understanding of what actually should I be doing at a base level of this.
That's really exactly the motivation on our end. I mean, especially with warbands and War Within, we see lots and lots more alts.
Good call.
And leveling is pretty quick. You got a bunch of warbound until equipped gear that you're passing over to a new character, and just jumping into their full rotation. We've never played the spec seriously before. Can be a pretty serious undertaking. And for some people, this may be enough for them, and that's fine too. But we recognize that there's so much, WoW has such a high skill ceiling that just recommending what the next ability isn't going to really remove that or fully solve that. There's still the muscle memory that you need to form, and then all of the nuances of like, we might have a recommendation for a rotation that makes sense if you're fighting a target dummy, you're fighting patchwork, but when you need to plan around the fact that you're gonna have to move in 4 seconds, that's a whole different like layer of skill that still rests with players.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know when I'm trying to, play a new spec for the first time or haven't played it in years, it often feels like I've got like a 30-minute checklist of, okay, I got to set up my keybinds, got to make sure, oh, this ability's changed since 2 expansions ago, I got to rebind that, and then I got to go and read some guides and figure out how all my new rotation works.
He's right.
Here's how the new set bonus works.
So that's what we were talking about
I can see it being really nice to just
There's
have
a lot of friction
this is a
to
way
get
to
going.
jump in to...
Okay, can we shout out that they had to put a fucking tooltip up for the Doctor that says Pop-Tart Corn Dog? Because I fucking love that. I fucking love that.
Good name.
They had to make a stinger to put Pop-Tart Corn Dog up on the screen on the official WoW broadcast. Fucking glorious. Glorious.
Content to do with your friends and have it work out nice and easily. One thing that jumps out to me is that a lot of the content I'd want to do would be like delves or keys. And in either of those cases, there's a lot of AoE.
Yeah.
Is this going to have are we going to detect whether we're fighting 3 targets, 5 targets, and is it going to cast my Arcane Explosion instead of my Arcane Blast, or is it just always going to be a single target?
It's not just single target. There is some sense of how many enemies are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect the recommendations.
Why do they always show the worst players playing their game, Jordan? The
this is good.
Frost Mage.
Best spec in the game,
right? But they
being showcased.
Jesus Christ! They always show some fucking idiot backpedaling or whatever, playing a mage, and it's.
Just
The goal is
styling on
not
everyone.
optimal. The goal is not like this is gonna, okay, everyone's always gonna get perfect parses and so forth going forward. But as a baseline, this should be, it should be useful the same way that many
Did
people
you see
find
that,
it.
Jay?
What?
That one button helper precasted Blizzard onto multiple mobs. So that's really interesting.
Wait, without what? It just
Look,
automatically
those
put it
mobs
above.
are not in combat. They've targeted one of them.
And you're not even aiming it.
No. Well, I mean, he's
don't
targeting
even-
the mob.
I got an aimbot. It'll put Blizzard automatically on the mobs. I don't even need to aim it. Aimbot, yes.
And so forth
for
going
it.
forward.
You can macro at
but
target.
as a
That's been
baseline, this should be, it should be useful the same way that many people find Tequila useful today.
I know, but it's
and
more
really, like a lot of
dramatic,
this,
yeah.
building on the foundations of the cooldown manager that just came out in 11.1.5, kind of reflects us hearing people in the community telling us that they feel like they need to seek out these third-party resources just to play the game at like a baseline effective level in competitive content. And us asking, like, is that where we want the game to be in the long term, and what can we do to build in native solutions to many of these problems?
Like the base construct of it, there is a, this will help you learn what you're supposed to do if you are new. And then there is a, hey, I don't want to be the best player at this game. That's totally fine. I play it for a different reason. I want to collect things. I want to like understand the story. I want to quest. I want to level, right? And I don't want to feel like I can go into any content and I just don't really know what I'm doing. I feel anxious about that. Like you have the ability to just be like, okay, well at least Blizzard's got me. I can have something at a base level where I can press one button and just kind of hang out and play the game. I have one question about the actual rotational thing. So is that going to like change with talent? So
Well
like
said,
let's
Max.
say,
Well said.
is it going to work off the base talent build, or let's say you select a talent that now moves a AoE button into your single target rotation? Is it going to be smart enough or planned to be smart enough to incorporate a bunch of different potential talent builds?
The goal is that it's aware of your talents.
The
and
goal is.
the logic is conditional based on what you
goal
do or
is,
don't
Jay,
have
the goal is.
talented. As with, this is going to be something that continues to evolve. We may not have every single possible permutation accounted for in the version that we roll out with.
Yeah.
But it should still be very useful in that form to everyone, and we'll just get refined from there. Similar to the cooldown manager that we know is like, that is a first take at this. We have plans to add much more customization,
Can I pose
much more
a question to you,
functionality.
Jay, and the chat? Do you prefer this approach? Because Blizzard's got an obvious problem right now that they're recognizing they're dealing with. Their game, the gulf between new player and higher end player is Grand Canyon in nature. It's enormous, right? And we can see that happen when people go from heroic to mythic. It's just an unbeatable mountain to climb for too many players because heroic is so dramatically easier compared to the mythic version of encounters. But can you scale that back at this point with players that are entrenched 20 years in and have grown with it and are used to it? And is this the preferable approach to try and bridge that gap? Because, do you strip down the game gradually? Yeah, I'll keep watching, but I want to just express my thoughts a little bit. Is it better to scale the game back down to a more, say, Cataclysm-ish era, where it was, borderline becoming complicated? Or to do it this way, where you're like, we'll kind of give you the point. I actually talked to Yoshi P about this in my interview with Yoshi P. Is he finds this a very difficult line to balance as well. Is like, how much do you just tell players what to press, and then if we do that, what's the point? I'm just wondering where the thoughts are with people on what would you do if you were presented with this problem of like, we go from here all the way to building quantum computing at the top end. So where's the best approach for your game to make it so that WoW ultimately is so inaccessible that if you wanted to start playing now, it's like, I might as well play classic WoW,
Yeah, so I've been playing a lot more casually in more recent times with WoW. When I was playing 16 hours a day every day doing keys and stuff, I would have been very different. But now I have less time, so I log on, and I am overwhelmed with my rotation. And I've been playing Frost Mage for however long now, and I get overwhelmed with Frost Mage, and there's a lot going on, and trying to find information takes a lot of time, and that you don't necessarily have. I don't want to spend all my time having to research outside of a game in order to play the game effectively. So I do think it's just a little bit too far in one direction. I do think that I like it when things are a little bit convoluted. Or at least I like it when things have a little bit of depth, that you feel rewarded for having knowledge. So, you know, I'm going to look at how many targets I've got up, and I know that this is going to be better to press depending on that many targets, or hey, that's a priority target there, I'm going to single target that mob down because it's really dangerous. So like, I kind of like those kind of intricate thoughts when you're going through encounter knowledge, spec knowledge. I just don't think it needs to be as complicated as it is at the moment, because it is really overwhelming with the amount of talents that you've got, with hero talents. And then even with that all set up, because I just copy a talent build, I'm not thinking
gearing.
about
Like
what
gearing
I'm
is,
taking.
yeah, gearing can
And
change
gearing,
depending on your hero
trinkets,
talents, right?
Gear sets, crafted gear, tier sets. There are so many overly convoluted systems that it can be great for people who live and breathe this game and spend it all day, every day playing it, because it adds depth. But for me, the professions are so overwhelming when I have less time to dedicate to the game and get my head around, like, how do I make a work order again? Like, I don't know, it's just overwhelming. You have to find somebody, I have to know what I'm crafting, and sparks are a precious resource. And that's all outside of your rotation as well. So yeah, I do think that things have gone a little bit too complicated rotation-wise, a little bit too convoluted. I think they can rein it in a bit, but I don't want things to be too simple, because I do enjoy the intricate WoW combat that you have.
Yeah, it's not an easy solution to fix. Like I mean, I'm throwing out guesses, and as much as I've prodded Ian to give me numbers, they have the stats of what's going on, and I kind of suspect that our thought process, which I agree with you on, is accommodating very few of the amount of players who are actually playing WoW. And I don't know if you've had this experience that I've had, where I had to host the WoW movie launch in the UK, and they did it was at a gamer bar. Where they had a bunch of people playing World of Warcraft all throughout this land center, and I was able to wander around and look over the shoulders of people playing WoW. And I when I tell you this, and I don't mean to be mean, like the most atrocious gameplay I've ever seen in my life. Like, you would think, like, some people are bad because they're not performing in your dungeon or whatever, but when you actually see people playing in front of you that are the uber casual, it's all over the place. Like, they're pressing things that make absolutely no sense whatsoever, and it's like, these are probably the way more people than we realize, which is why they've decided to bring this add-on in. And I think it's an acceptance of two things. The game's too complicated. If we start trimming down the high end, though, we lose our prestige, you know, and those older players, the veteran players, are not going to have fun like you and me. Like, I want that friction, I want that learning, I want that education.
That in the encounters, then, like, make the high-end Mythic Plus extremely difficult. Put it in the gameplay rather than kind of the rotation that then affects everyone. I think.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, this isn't as easy as, like, stick a fucking plug in it and it's fixed. You know what I mean? That's the issue.
A full
to that over time as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting feature.
I wonder how much the guys were
The thing
prompted
that's most
before this
exciting to
interview
me
of the
is
topic,
in the
so they
broader
could think,
context
stuff.
of the
Or if it was
cooldown
off the
manager,
cuff. I imagine it
of
was
all these
prompted.
other edit mode changes that have come out.
Well, I
there was a
can't
time
confirm
5 years ago in WoW where if you were just getting into the game, there was an intimidating list of these are the add-ons that you need, and if you're not using these, you're kind of worse, right? Like, you're noticeably worse.
I mean, there'll be
If you can't
definite
track
questions they
your
have
group
to
members'
ask you.
major cooldown, right? Like, you're worse at Mythic Plus than somebody who is, right? And it seems like the goal that has been accomplished with a lot of these things that have been coming into the base UI is you can use those add-ons if you want, but we now have a native way to the game that you don't have to get an add-on.
That is pretty much exactly our long-term philosophical goal here, right? Like, add-ons are amazing. The things that the community has done over the last 20 years to allow people to experience different aesthetics, different functionality, have information available at their fingertips, like, that is a huge part of WoW's success, and we don't question or want to undermine that for a moment. At the same time, like, as you said, ideally it is about what do you want? How do you prefer to have things presented to you, and not what do you have to do? What is a group mate or raid leader or whatever telling you must download? Or if you ask people, you know, hey, how can I get better? I'm really struggling at this. The first answer shouldn't be, well, download this add-on, this add-on, and this add-on, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Because that's starting to get into that mandatory place, whether we like it or not. So yeah, I think, you know,
No, you've been there for
longer
a while.
term, these
They've been there for a
initiatives kind
while
of
with
fit
the mandatory
into
add-ons for most
part
people.
of, you know, how we're thinking about the role of add-ons in WoW. You know, as we can probably all agree, today, there is a sense that if you want to really be the best you can, if you want to play competitive content, there are certain add-ons that are required, that are simply going to improve your success over not having them, period. We would like to get away from that being the case.
Interesting.
I think I'd love to see a WoW one day where you can still customize the aesthetic look of your UI, you can have information and quest helpers and all the other things that you might want to have to make your experience a bit more seamless. But that at the end of the day, when you're in competitive content, when you're queuing up for a rated PvP match,
sounds like the
going into a
FF14
high
approach,
key,
Jay.
when you're trying to get a first kill on a raid boss, there isn't the sense that you are, just holding yourself back if you're not using specific tools. We know that there's a lot of work to do to get to a place where that could be the reality. The first steps really are going to be continuing to build up the just right out of the box functionality that World of Warcraft offers to shrink that gap.
Does this not feel to you like this is step one on the way to killing weak auras? And simplifying bosses.
I actually really enjoy the depth
at the same time
of specs and rotation in WoW. I do really enjoy that. I wouldn't really want to move into making rotations and specs easy.
I don't think
that the encounters are hard, because I feel like that's where Final Fantasy 14 has gone, especially with the Black Mage changes in 14. I do really enjoy playing my rotation, and I love that in WoW. So I just, does everything have to be in extremes? Can we have our rotations being a little bit more challenging and the content?
I think I worded that incorrectly. This feels like something that people have been asking for a while. I can only speak for the Echo Raiders, but they've been asking for this for a while as well. Like certainly Mirez and Roger have been champions of this. They're at a point with certain things where like recores feel mandatory, certainly in the race, which I know is it's like a few hundred people, right, who are taking part in that. But it is correct. Like this just makes this infinitely easier. When I say simplify bosses, if you look at that through the lens of if we simplify bosses but also stop this technology which is making extremely hard things easier, which they have to do because otherwise you would just dwarf it, then that actually in turn doesn't make it easier. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like they have to make things very, very complex because the players are going to come up with tools that simplify that, and in removing that aspect of it, you can make the bosses easier. And we have actually seen evidence of that in the last two raids, right? Most things could be picked up and managed based on an energy bar, visuals which have got better. There were lots of elements here until the last two bosses, really. At least we had this conversation, it was the least weak or a heavy race in a very long time until it got to the later bosses, which seems to be where they've been naturally moving it. It doesn't make the boss easy, right? But everything, all the information you need is provided in-game through gameplay. And therefore you have more fun because you just have to watch the game. You don't need to look at a bunch of data, streaming. You don't need to make it look like the Matrix. Well, it's not, that does not only cater to the 1%. I think what Ian's saying here, and I'd like to chat with him about this, is that right now, if you start World of Warcraft and you say, I want to do raiding, you're probably going to get recommended a bunch of add-ons that are going to, and someone's going to tell you need them, right? It's not going to be like, you can get them or you don't. Even if you're doing normal mode or whatever, you're going to get told to get DBM, Deadly Boss Mods. You're probably going to get told to get Weak Auras and download this streamer's pack or go to Wago and get this one. Download the Echo Raid tools. They're built into the UI now, right? If you download like the Echo one, I think Liquid's got something similar. You could get all their weak auras and things like that. You're totally getting all that stuff to get started, which I think he's saying like that should not be the case. We should build the bosses so you can, it's an energy bar. You can tweak your UI aesthetically, like he says, but everything you need to fight this should be here. And you shouldn't have this laundry list of shit you need to get going. And in that way you can we've seen it with several bosses now. You don't need ultra complex Queen Ashara style things going on to make the bosses hard. That's not necessary. I don't know, does that make sense, or am I off base?
No, I agree. I think the thing with what makes the kind of the weak auras and add-ons so necessary is because the base game, and they've been doing a great job on this, but the base game doesn't give you the information that you need. A lot of the time, weak auras are just tracking information and putting that somewhere on your screen that helps the player, right? Just your cooldown, for example, rather than being in a tiny little thing at the bottom of the screen, you can place that in a more obvious place that you can track it better. Default nameplate. So I actually don't really run with any add-ons. I play very minimal. I have big wigs and little wigs, of course, but I run Plater, and the base nameplates in the game don't give you the information that you need. I honestly feel blind if I go into a dungeon without the Plater add-on, because Plater will show you the information so that you can make the decisions that you need to. What cast is the mob casting? Do I need to interrupt that? Has it got a buff that I can spell steal? Like, there's so much information lacking in the default game that then you need an add-on for. Whereas if they had, better nameplates in the base game, or you could customize that somehow in the base game, then you wouldn't need the add-on. And I think that's why there's kind of less weak auras in this raid than before, because they've added a lot of visual clarity to the base game. So they are doing a better job of it. But yeah, people telling people, oh, you need this add-on, this add-on, this add-on. Yeah, big wigs, little wigs is pretty important for raid encounters, I suppose.
Yeah. I wonder if they're going to build it in.
It's mostly just information, and that information should be in the base game.
Yep. I mean, it's off, like you're saying there, it's like debuffs and enrages are there, but they're buried in such a way that they practically might not exist, or don't need to exist, right? They're usually tiny icons on nameplates. It's certainly if you're using default, right? You're not getting that like, this thing's enraged and it's about to monster you, or this cast of 6 is the one that's going to murder you, or this guy's buffing.
I think we're aware that at the very end of this process, we probably are going to have to rein in some of the functionality.
There it is! Oh, wow, what a pause!
To do, like,
there it is.
They're fucking in-combat problem solving specifically, where it's like automating coordination, communication in ways that are always going to be better than anything the UI could natively provide you.
Pause of the day, that, Jay.
Yeah, so that moves us into like raid bosses, where
that's pretty epic.
I don't want to name any names, but there are people who have optimized a little bit of their own fun out of the game sometimes. I don't know where any of them is. They could be anywhere. They could be in this room with us.
Hey man, I am the number one. Let's just YOLO this. Let's just do the fight. Let's make it work. And then sometimes it gets to let's try to make something that could be 95% successful, 100 or 99, right? And there's a lot of frustration with the tech involved with that. I would definitely be. I think a lot of the raiding community would be pretty for that. I think a well-designed mechanic that the game giving you enough information to solve this on your own realistically. A lot of the times the community will just use one because it's like what everyone else uses. It gets you in the same place. But if that doesn't exist and the game is giving you that information, it's objectively better, right?
And even if you are doing it very well, manually, it's always going to be better to do it perfectly in a competitive situation. I mean, having watched, your raid leading, for example, over many, many years over the Race to World First, like years ago, you would call much more stuff verbally.
Very true.
Like going back to, Legion, BFA era, whereas nowadays it seems like if there is something you're calling repeatedly on attempts, the first thing you're doing is asking if, hey, can we automate this? And
it's not nerves. If you've ever spoke to Max in person, when his brain is going and he's on his brain's going 99% with what he's thinking about, his legs always go. It's really funny. Like if you sat talking to him and you post questions that he's really fucking right now, Max is thinking like at about 200 miles an hour. This is like raid leader mode. You'll see it during the Race to World First. It's full raid leader mode. Yeah. He's like totally engaged. You'll see it.
Get me out of the business of talking, which seems like it might be less enjoyable for you as a raid leader.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if we're talking about that, I could talk all day about that. Yeah. No, I felt like you certainly had more of an impact when you had the ability to, influence the fight more. But the reality is just getting some way to automate it for your players is just better. It is funny. Like when I do that now, I think, what else can I be doing with my time? I could be like looking at other ways to optimize, and it's purely for the sake of getting better. So yeah, for my own enjoyment, yeah, that's sweet. Let's do that. I'm trying to wonder also about those kind of mechanics. So like what bosses have existed in my head, I think in the past couple of years, there's not many, but have been defined by when we're progressing this boss, we feel like maybe we're progressing a weak aura. Something like Brood Twister
or
Echo
Shield,
Malfarian.
He's got to say
Jailer, maybe
I he's got to dance around it, but I bet he brings up some Sneak Not Do LA in some fucking way, shape, or form. Like, in some way. I guarantee it. He's got to dance around it, but I bet he'll, like, try and dig it in there.
Was one of the first ones, right? And those mechanics, I feel like, could not have been done, or probably would have been nerfed without weak auras, or having that effectiveness of that reduced. What do you do as a fight designer now? Do you I know you're obviously like really passionate about raiding. You've raided for a really long time. What do you have to avoid those kind of assignment mechanics? Are there things in game you can use to like naturally sort out those things? Like, do you give more time for the mechanics? Like do you have to stray away from assignments in general because the community has just, whether you like it or not, has like trained themselves to have something solve that for them? Do you have to like go back into like a more simple version of that? Do you find other ways to make fights difficult? There's obviously a bunch of ways to do that.
The way we design encounters has been influenced in significant ways by the way players use add-ons. I know, the community sometimes speculates that, this was built clearly to require an add-on. I can't say that's never the case. No encounter designer is ever sitting around saying, all right, we're going to make this mechanic, and then players will write this weak aura to solve it this way.
Bullshit.
All right, mission accomplished, let's ship the boss.
Bullshit. I don't know if you ever did the Ashara dance. Fucking bollocks. There is no way you intended players to solve that fast, that quickly. Fuck you.
Yeah, it's also the jailer bombs as well. When you have the 6 bombs go out and every single person needs to find a unique hole to jump in, no overlaps, within like 3 seconds. And you have to do that the entire way around in order to move into the next phase.
Yeah.
You can't process it and organize yourself in that short of time. That's why I say that 14 does this really well, because if that jailer bomb mechanic went out in 14, you would have bombs that have varying timers, right? You'd have bombs that go off in 6 seconds. You'd have bombs that go off in 10 seconds. Yep. So the game gives you tools so that you can identify and coordinate yourselves given the information you're given in the base game. So you can say, hey, the 6 second timers, you're going to be the ones that are closer to the middle of the platform. You're going to go in those, and then you can kind of coordinate with yourselves perhaps. But if you give people tools in game to be able to coordinate themselves, then you wouldn't need the weak aura, because that's essentially what the weak aura is doing.
Yeah, there's I would also point out Neltharion spread. Like, you're exactly right. Like, there's ways of making intense complexity. I don't think the FF14 model overall fits in WoW, but elements of it doesn't mean it doesn't work. Like you're saying, absolutely do work. Where you can track it, you have time to adjust and think about it, and then you think about how you go into some Savages and certainly into Ultimates, is like you've got like 10 of these things happening simultaneously. That you have, and then it's also going to repeat or reverse or do something along those. Like Shiva would be a good example of what we did with the mirror placements. Like Shiva mirror placements is different several times in terms of what every player needs to do. A little easier with 8-man compared to the 20-man, but there are elements correct you can pull from that to add a lot of difficulty that doesn't require it. But this idea that like some of these mechanics were designed without the add-on intention, bollocks.
I'd like to see them to have done it.
I was like, okay, show me you doing this without use of an add-on, like consistently.
But when we're thinking about the overall pacing of a fight, the tuning, we might get feedback on a fight that it feels like there isn't enough going on, when in actuality there are 4 or 5 mechanics going on, but add-ons are largely compartmentalizing and making it so that most players don't have to think about them most of the time. And then players give us feedback that, hey, this fight felt a little bit slow, like I was just punching the boss for 3 minutes. And so then maybe we add another mechanic in the next iteration of that, or a similar encounter. We get to a higher overall complexity space where, there's just, you look at the dungeon journal and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and maybe half of it doesn't even matter because add-ons are going to handle it for you.
Full of
I think that's not a great place for things
tooltips,
to
essentially.
land. It also definitely ties our hands in some ways. Like, I think we do fewer coordination mechanics.
Yeah, Max is all in on this conversation.
Like,
look at his brain going, man.
There were encounters where like the primary challenge for your raid was by design coordinating some rotation. And the execution beyond that wasn't super complicated, but making sure that this thing stayed soaked, or that you were rotating people through with their debuff or whatever, that became a big part of the fight's challenge. Now we know ultimately that like that can never be the thing that we lean on for challenge, because it's going to be solved.
That's been gone for a while.
He's
talking about the arms race
what we
between
think of
devs
as the
and
more
add-on developers,
interesting MMOE like communication, cooperation, figuring
ago.
out systems for having these things work in a way that feels collaborative. It's going to be downloading the weak aura pack, setting it up appropriately, maybe having 3 or 4 frustrating wipes because there was a typo in the configuration. Which is
losing a whole night.
That's not what I think anyone really wants.
I think it was
to be.
whoever Robin
So
was
we
raiding
move
at the
away
time
from
spent
making
2
those mechanics
days
as
wiping
much,
because the Farak weak aura
and
wouldn't
lean
work
more on
correctly for the
things
shield.
that add-ons can't solve for you,
have different
like
ones.
moving out of a swirly under your feet
got a fucking different
with
one
only
on.
a little bit of time to respond.
I'm using
I don't
big
think
wigs
it's a
using DBM.
coincidence
It's marking
that
different
more
fucking
and
people,
more of our
different players.
players have those sorts of
nothing
just
worse.
like twitch reaction, avoidance mechanics, whereas that used to be one type of fight that we did. The design space is definitely constrained by the knowledge that, if we lean on it too heavily, it's just going to get trivialized.
Some of my favorite WoW raid boss memories are bosses like Mythic Unot,
deep cut,
Mythic
by that.
Anduin. You have to spread out and then you get these marks and you have to go to the right places. And there used to be definitely a library of mechanics like that where you would get...
Do you read that as shitting on Echo's very complicated weak aura for Anduin that was totally pointless? I like to think that these guys, like Dratnos especially, because he's such a clever cunt, right? Dratnos is such a clever bastard that he's sliding that in there because he knows Noahs like us would be like, I know exactly what you're talking about, you motherfucker. I would like to believe that's the case. He is. He's sharp as a fucking knife. And I was like, like Anduin, where you just had to move around and get in the right place. And it's also like, remember when Echo made that fucking supercomputer weak aura and it did nothing?
Them, and then you'd have to think, and you'd have to have like a system, and you'd have to have 20 players sort of coordinate and become one team that does a mechanic like that. And the fact now that add-ons take on much of that job of coordinating us, I think that almost all the Mythic Raiders I know would be delighted to move back to a world where we did that in our brains, 100%. Right?
I might
but in
even want to
Dragonflight,
raid
we
again.
saw a little bit of an attempt to make that happen, right, with the private aura system. And what ended up happening was we still had the weak aura, but now we also have a macro that we need to press, and then the weak aura will assign us the same thing. So I'm a little bit worried. How's the arms race between the weak aura devs trying to come up with a new way around the restriction that you're putting in? Is this just a further escalation in that?
Hopefully not. I think our goal here is kind of disarmament and definitely not further escalation. I think we understand that
gun control.
We're not going to try more little targeted things like that are going to encourage workarounds, and it just ends up with this back and forth. Because if there is a way to solve a complex mechanic, but you have to jump through a couple of more hoops to do so, you'll do that, and then just be more annoyed by the process. Our goal is to try to get out of that space entirely, and so I think down the line eventually that may mean some broader restrictions on specifically what information add-ons have access to.
Fucking called it, Jay. Like, this is the fucking first step. Your add-on, your weak aura boss add-ons are getting full binned, I'm telling you. They've got to try and kill it.
About combat events in real time. At the same time, we know that that's not a thing
Yoshi
that we could just
that
do
now.
right now without providing a lot more on our end. Both in terms
this
of
is a great move.
Just UI type functionality, but also looking at how we're designing some encounters, how some of our classes work. I think there are tons of add-ons that are healthy and valuable and really important to how players play the game that do rely on that flow of information. Everything from something as simple as damage meters to honestly boss time, like ability timelines, like the DBM style, like when is this next ability going to fire that people
are they putting
basically
DBM
been
in
with forever. That's not the computational weak auras. That's just, hey, this ability is going to happen in 15 seconds. Like, we want to build in our own version of that.
Sick.
Like, I think down the line, we'd love to see a place where there is a boss timeline as just part.
How is Blizzard going to handle spell queuing in their own add-on? That's going to be interesting. That's got to be interesting. How does Blizzard's own add-on handle spell queuing? It's like, oh shit. Oh shit, it's all fucking backed up. I don't know what's going to happen. That's cool though, right? I mean, we've obviously, Bigwigs developers and DBM developers are in our chat a lot. And not to shit on what they do. But it does cause problems with the mix of both. And it is ultimately required, right? There are mechanics that are going off. You need to know that you've got a spread in 15 fucking seconds. And that information isn't always conveyed by the game. Good. I think this is a good move to have this. The bosses are designed with this actual functionality in mind from the ground up. Is like there are timers for when the things are going to happen, phase changes or whatever. I like this. You have an issue with that, Jay? That putting DBM in?
No, I think that's integral and important information. It'd be interesting to see, how they'll implement it and how it'll look. I can only really draw from experience elsewhere, which is raiding in 14. I don't want to be like comparing them or anything. It's just I've savage raided in 14 now, and the bosses will kind of have a name of an ability or a set of mechanics, and when you see that cast timer and you see the name of whatever it is of that mechanic, you know what's upcoming, but you don't it doesn't necessarily tell you what it's doing. You have to you see the name of it, and then you see what happens, and then you know that that's upcoming when you go again, if that makes sense. So, because I was thinking, because you've got mythic bosses with secret phases, maybe, or you know, whatever you have.
Don't say it.
It would be really sad if there was a mythic Gallywix phase, and then the boss was like, "Okay, I'm going to throw some bombs now. Cast timer. Oh, I guess that's what's happening. Okay, bombs away."
I see what you're saying. Does the DBM, if Blizzard implements a boss mode and there's an extra phase, does it already give you the timers for what's coming up? That's interesting. Or does it unlock for you? Oh, does it unlock for you after you've seen it once? That would be interesting. Probably not, because like the Dungeon Journal didn't work that way. I imagine if they were going to do some sort of mythic extra phase, which we do get, is like that maybe wouldn't work. But then they just make their own. I don't know. That'd be interesting to see how that's going to work.
Part of the encounter UI, and that's not something you need an add-on for. And that way we can hopefully eventually get to a point where we're really just cutting out the weak aura that solves the mechanic for you, but not the informational stuff that you feel like, it really feels like the game should have been telling you all along.
Exactly.
Where add-ons are,
this is a great
kind of filling
philosophy
in some gaps
change.
there.
Okay, so coming in 11.1.7,
overall, this is very
we're gonna
positive.
have the rotation helper, those two options. What of the rest of this initiative? Is any of the rest of this in 11.1.7, or are we just starting the conversation now?
I think there's a lot of stuff that we're working on. I think, we've seen the cooldown manager and then the rotation assist coming. I think down the line, it's some of the stuff that I touched on. I don't have specific patch dates right now, but we are looking at damage meters. We're looking at nameplate improvements. We are looking at
nameplate improvement,
like a raid encounter information presentation that shows you timeline of boss abilities coming up. Things in that general space.
I think
we're looking at all the places where players say right now, you need this weak aura, you need this add-on to be competitive.
Yeah, it does hag us.
And asking ourselves, like, how do we change our game to make that not the case? And some of that's going to be add-on functionality, or UI functionality. Other aspects are going to be looking at how we're building some encounters or how some class mechanics work. Like, I think it's super fair to point at some specs, like let's say Outlaw Rogue, who I know are easy one to pick on in some of these ways, and ask, like, how is anyone really supposed to execute this perfectly with the base UI? Almost any time we're tracking like stacks of a buff, and you need to make a decision where it's like, if you're between 4 and 7 stacks, you should do this, otherwise don't. Those are not reasonable tests for us to be posing to our players without providing them the information to do it correctly. And so we need to either provide the information, simplify the mechanic, or both.
Cool.
There are a lot of players who love the version of Outlaw Rogue that has existed over the past few years. So I think there's always some fear when this discussion starts up of, is the answer going to be to simplify everything? And I think it's really exciting to hear instead that the answer is, okay, we'll maybe simplify some of these huge outliers, but we're going to bring in the functionality that makes it so that instead of needing to download a weak aura to solve this, right? Instead of needing to have a complicated assistant tell you, now you're supposed to press this button, now you're supposed to press this button, instead we're going to provide that information in a more clear way than looking at the top right of your screen to see your buffs and trying to catch the rotation.
100%, right? When I did my big Legion UI pack, we spent hours doing Rogue. Because if you, not Legion, Shadowlands actually. Because if you had Kyrian, it changed how you used your ability, your combo points. If you didn't have it, if you had certain extra combo point building talents, like the amount of work we put into creating that UI to solve the problems they had created because of how just combo points work differently on a talent and spec and fucking, I forgot the name of the fucking Covenant basis, was huge. It was so much work because it dramatically changed every single time. And the game UI was awful for like trying to convey the fact that all this information is so different. So it definitely needs fixing. And I'm hoping they get it right. I have a feeling they won't though. It's taken a very long time to get the new UI that they have for WoW for raid frames and stuff is really good, but it's still not there. Do you know what I mean? It's still not quite there. Like, it's not tracking the right information. So they need to start building in more customizable, advanced options for players, because it's almost there, but not good enough if you're a good player to replace add-ons, I don't think. Like, they're saying they're going to do nameplate improvements, and you brought up Plater earlier as being like a fundamental part of your gameplay. Will it be as customizable as Plater is with that information? Or will it be like better, but you as a seasoned player are going to like, yeah, theirs is better. And in fact, most players are probably going to be fine with this, but it's not what it needs to be.
Yeah, it's again all about displaying and tracking the right information. So if the reason why you're running Plater is to see, for example, what buffs, debuffs the mobs have, and the baseline new nameplates doesn't display what buff a mob has, well, you're still lacking that information. So you're still going to have to require the add-on that gives you that information, because it's crucial to your decision-making process. Do I need to purge this mob? You know, just little decisions like that. Oh, when bolstering was around, you'd have to see which one, you'd have to manage all the bolstering stacks. It could be quite hard to see on like the default nameplates. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head all the different things that you'd be juggling that you couldn't with the base nameplates. Yeah. So it just depends if it again is displaying the right information, because I do think that's what it comes down to at the end of it. The add-ons are needed because you don't have the information that you need.
Yeah, 100%. Since was asking us, Jay, do you think they'll work with add-on devs to help build the functionality? No, Blizzard can obviously. I don't think so. Blizzard can. I don't know if you agree, Jay, but Blizz can do all this. They can make add-ons themselves. They're not gonna.
Yeah, I mean that would be cute and it would be nice, but no, I don't necessarily think they would.
No, Andrew had a good point here though. Is it's worth noting that unlike the add-on devs, they'd be on both sides of the fence. If something is too arse to handle, they could just change how it works altogether instead, which is absolutely true. If they're like building in this functionality, say the Outlaw Rogue that we just mentioned there, and it's like, God, this is actually so annoying to build a rotation. Because you can imagine that. It's like, actually building the rotation helper for what we've created is such a fucking joke. Let's just change how this works in the first place. Because clearly, if it's taking us all this effort to do a rotation helper for this spec, then there's something fundamentally fucking wrong that we should probably look at, right? Like, which is what we were saying earlier. It's like, if we are at this point, they're already admitting, like, the game is a little too complex in general. For a huge amount of game players who are just going to be like, I'd rather just play something else at this point.
Between all the other 20 that are changing in combat?
That's definitely the goal. You know, I think we want World of Warcraft to be as approachable as possible, but we also love that the skill ceiling in the game is as incredibly high as it is. That allows for tons of differentiation and self-expression and accomplishment. But I think, a lot of at its core, a lot of skill in WoW, I think, boils down to multitasking ability. And like even just, you might be able to do amazing damage just testing it against a target dummy. Very different world when you're also in an encounter and need to do 3 mechanics at the same time. And we see,
good point.
Tunnel visioning DPS are a meme
so true. Even
for a reason, right? They're just focused on their rotation, and whoops, they just messed up the encounter mechanic.
People
or vice versa. Someone who is good at
dummy,
mechanics,
as soon as the mechanic happens,
goes off a cliff.
They just go immediately
really, like, the function of a lot of these add-ons is to offload a portion of that computational complexity. And we recognize, like, if we are removing some of that functionality, we're providing more information, we can probably remove a couple of mechanics, but still keep the same level of challenge.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about
the goal is not to make it easier. The goal is to make it less complex.
Yep.
And I think that's, I think it's a key distinction there, because I think it often can sound like, oh, this is about, this might be about dumbing down the game or simplifying things. It's not that. It's about trying to create
that's
a
one
more
of those nuanced
approachable
chats
baseline.
like we had earlier about encounter design, making it easier. Simplifying doesn't necessarily mean easier if you look at it through a different lens of an add-on-less world. That I think will get lost on a lot of viewers, not about like here, but in general. They'll just hear, oh, you're dumbing it down. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those things that, like, you need to take in this whole picture to understand, and I think it might get received negatively because it won't be interpreted correctly. I don't know. You run into that sometimes. You try to express a bigger idea than is black and white.
Yeah, and everything's always in extremes as well.
Yeah, it's hard to convey that. It's like you're thinking of, like, it's a difficult thing, and this is why I talked to Yoshi P about it as well, because he's like, dude, it's my biggest issue internally. It's like, how do we decide where that line is and where do we cross it? And it's not a question that's been answered. by any game dev in the world, especially ones I've talked to. It's their biggest difficulty is like, how do you manage this? And there's no answer to it. There really isn't.
Line experience that still has every bit as much room for differentiation.
When you were talking about add-ons that things have been in the game, been inspired by it, you mentioned a damage meter.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in just what your view is, philosophy-wise, about damage meters in games like this.
That's a great question, and I think ultimately we have to be guided by what our community prefers and
I
what
love
we
the
see
damage
them
meter.
doing today.
It's a combat-focused game.
Like the single most popular add-on used across the entire game is a damage meter by like a fair margin.
Okay.
The majority of players, the large majority of players, have a damage meter add-on installed, and so that indicates that people want to see that information at least about themselves. We definitely want more nuanced measures of success and understanding, like how successful were you or how much did you contribute on this run, highlighting things like interrupts, highlighting things like avoidable damage to give a fuller picture of performance.
Right?
But at the end of the day, I think if someone's trying a new stack, trying a new talent build, getting a new trinket, and they want to see like how did this affect my performance compared to the last run, that's an important piece of information to have. And so I think we know that in any world where we were going to limit some of the ability of add-ons to like again do that real-time combat event tracking, we would need to provide a damage meter solution of our own. And I think one of the exciting things is I think if we're doing that on our end, we can also have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different combat phase, who's out of range or whatever. Yeah. It could just be like, this is official and going to be accurate all the time.
We were obviously mostly thinking about Mythic Raid when our brains go to how this is going to affect things, but the overwhelming majority of players are in heroic raids, normal raids, raid finder raids, doing Mythic Plus dungeons, right? When we're talking about making these changes to what WeCores can do, is there an appetite for changing how heroic and normal raids function as well? Like, do we see these problems in there as well for what add-ons can do and how they solve things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all trickles down, right? I mean, I think maybe even more, a larger percentage of players doing Mythic Raid might use specific weak aura packs than, let's say, normal. Yeah. But those add-ons are used by the majority of players right now, and certainly other, boss mods are as well. And I think a lot of it just comes down to, what are the coordination challenges that we're presenting?
It doesn't work if you try to force players.
There's something that everyone is relying on a tool right now.
People don't care, and that's fine. It's not a problem.
We would have to change it to still keep it the same level of challenging, but without that same automation assistance. And that can take many forms. It can be there's one or two fewer things to soak. You have an extra couple of seconds to like actually spread out on the fly. It's a pretty common mechanic of like, all right, 3 people get a debuff and they just have to like run out in different directions from each other. People have been just kind of playing the game and doing those for years and years. But of course, if you can if the time you're given to react is so tight that you can't afford to do that, then people do gravitate towards, all right, we're going to put diamond, circle, and triangle on the ground. Everyone's going to get an auto-assigned marker, and you just know, like, I'm going to run to my marker to guarantee that it's executed correctly. I think it's a bit more interesting if we give you a couple of seconds so that you can look around and make sure you're not running in the same direction.
Exactly.
And then do the exact same thing.
Style,
I mean, at the end of the day, raiding in particular, but group PvE, group PvP too. Like in an MMO, a huge portion of, I think, the fun of it is just coordination, communication, feeling like everyone's working together.
What I could already see? This is a meme, but I could already see Zayu and Peekaboo, etc., making PvP videos with the one button macro and like just posting these highlight videos of wrecking people with the one button macro, like lol 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 lol. Right.
Overcome some challenge in front of them.
Correct.
Yeah, I could totally see those videos already being
more of that organic
spamming one
collaboration button, as opposed to it just being like
disregard. There's some of the best players in the world
tool.
Who are obviously trolling.
I think we'll open up a lot of design avenues for the game going forward.
Throughout the last couple years, especially in Mythic Plus, that had been ramping in complexity. You've seen, and actually, even if you can go back, like you can see the amount of things that people have in their UI to help them know that something's happening. So like back in Power Auras, it was, there was just some giant some giant face on your screen would pop up, and that meant that something procced. And then it's gotten more refined. And now, even in it's been ramping the past couple of years, you see like you listen to someone's POV who's doing High Mythic Plus right now, you're gonna hear AoE, dodge, frontal, circle. Yep. Like it's just every bit of audio aid they've used to it's in the idea of being optimal, it's not required. And especially this patch, I think Mythic Plus complexity has actually gone down.
If you're using a one button macro in PvP, you're gonna lose to any better player.
About that.
Like, it's not a problem.
So that stuff is less required, but people have like kind of already baked that in the UI. Is that something that you're looking to either have an ability to have that in the game, Or is that something you don't want to have happen, where it's more like you're organically doing mechanics because you see them, or are you okay with all of the audio and visual aids that exist currently within add-ons?
I think the answer is mixed there. I think like audio prompts are something that are super valuable to people. That's something we want to continue to add support for on our end as well. Like we know we've got feedback we've gotten around the 11.1.5 cooldown manager would be that many people would appreciate being able to have audio prompts tied to certain things or procs firing, and that's something they would miss about weak auras. We want to make sure that we're offering that kind of thing as well.
Okay.
Beyond that, I think a lot of what we've seen is frankly us not doing a sufficiently good job of telegraphing the importance of certain mechanics and their impact, and players needing to come up with solutions for them externally. Ideally, there's a concept that we call affordance, which is basically just how well is something telegraphed, how intuitive is it with visual presentation. And ideally,
with
the
your
affordance of the mechanic should match
if you're just doing your PV rotation against somebody stood in front of you.
If you have a random mob in a dungeon pack that has a frontal that will just delete you if you're not getting out of the way of it, and it's just one thing going on among a half dozen other things, why? And why? Like, how could we call that out better with visuals, with a longer cast time, with how we're creating the pack in the first place? And that's just one example of one of the areas in which we know we can do better. Something else we've talked about on the UI front is we would want the ability to, on our end, flag mob casts in Mythic Plus as like lethal. As like this should be a high priority interrupt, because we know players are going to basically look to solve that anyway.
It's everything.
If there are 3 casters in a pack, and 2 of them it's actually kind of okay to let them free cast, but one of them, if they ever get a cast off, you're probably going to wipe. They shouldn't all just look indistinguishable on your screen, and us expect you to figure that out on your own.
They did that in season 1, right? Wasn't there like a couple casts or like super giga you die death volley or something?
Yeah.
And they had this big animation.
Our Kara casters where they hunker down, there's green glowy stuff around them, and they're casting a volley, and you're like, all right, I gotta kick that.
You can be playing WoW for 2 days, and you're like, that can't happen. Yes.
But I'm looking forward to an M+ then, where if we're talking about maybe taking away my ability to air horn myself on a certain cast, something like that, if instead I have to be now looking at a mob and there is a sort of a visual language that I can come to expect, like if the mob is hunkering down and it's got particle effects around it, that means I gotta kick it. I think that would be more fun for everybody as well, rather than having the air horns be the solution.
Definitely.
That is entirely our hope, right? I think, and just to be super clear, I think we see the taking away part, the restricting functionality, as the end of this long road. I think we know, we want to make it very clear, we're not sitting here being like, all right, we want you to play the game the way we intended, and we're gonna take away your tools. We just want to bridge that gap.
We're not doing covenants again, Jay. Just want to be fucking clear. We're not taking away your choices. We're not telling you to play a certain way. We're just fucking letting you know this is a long journey. Just easing you in. Just letting you know we're definitely not doing that again. Trust.
And we have a lot of work to do on our end to keep building up more improvements, more functionality. And it's not just the UI. The VFX changes that you mentioned are a part of that overall effort of us asking, what are the places where players feel like they need add-ons to succeed? Why is that the case? And when it's like, it's not clear when you're standing in something, and so I need, GTFO or some other, sound effect to let me know that I'm standing in something lethal.
I can't play with it.
I can't fucking stand it.
It should be obvious.
Nagura sent it me sneakily.
And we want to keep chipping away at those things.
And hopefully she wouldn't tell me how to turn it off. It was
really
on
the
fucking
only
PT.
difference between what we are offering
and
what
powerful
add-ons can do is that small subset of like computational problem-solving stuff, at which point we can move forward.
So throughout the evolution of private auras, we've seen, initially when they came out, they were like kind of, a lot of friction was involved. And then I think they were done really, really well in a couple of cases, starting in Emir Drasil, where they were a mechanic like P1 Fire Act. You had the circles you had to quickly spread out for. They were pretty fast, but they were too fast to use a macro for it. And it basically forced the players into something they would have used a weak aura for, to just do the mechanic normally. And like, are there lessons you've learned there of like, this is actually how we can design mechanics or kind of assignment things going forward? And then also, is this, if done successfully, would this also remove private auras as what would have been, I guess, kind of a temporary solution to the weak aura problem?
Yeah, we've definitely learned a lot from how private auras have rolled out.
Yeah.
Certainly we understand that if we're ever using it on something that like is on a long enough time frame that macros are going to let you solve it and it's punishing enough to not solve it, all we're doing is creating an extra annoying hoop to jump through, and we like hotfixed off the private aura designation from some of those back in Amir Drasil, and we've let that shape how and where we use or don't use it going forward. And so yeah, I think examples like the Furak mechanic that you mentioned are ones where like when we know that everyone is in a level playing field, everyone just has to play the game, play the mechanic. We can tune it accordingly so that it's hard but doable.
By add-ons.
We'd like to be able to do more of that for sure.
Yeah, I see the Furak first intermission, which was a private aura and then had to get hotfixed off of the private aura, as sort of a cautionary tale for if there's a mechanic that is only doable with the weak aura assignments, and then we take away that without giving an adequate replacement, then it's worse than doing nothing at all. What would a mechanic like that look like in a world where we don't have a computational solution to it, right? Would it be slower and fewer sets of like lower damage numbers on these things?
I think probably a bit of all of that. There's multiple knobs there. There's, on Mythic we might default to like everyone in today's world, everyone in the raid has to participate in this, and there's enough things to be soaked that if anyone isn't doing it, it's not going to work out. Versus maybe shifting to a world where there's a little bit more slush, things are a little bit slower, there's a little bit more time to react, to get into place organically based on which buff you were assigned, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, our goal here is to preserve challenge, and we know that we'd have to design encounters differently in some cases to deliver.
We might see some very ropey bosses coming up here,
how many
Jay,
pull counts it takes, just what progression looks like.
Oh, that'd be so fun.
While living in a different mechanical world. When we talk about restricting any kind of add-on functionality, many players
we might
very
see
rightly
some very ropey. This could be a very ropey journey they're going on here, where we see some
absolutely do this boss in this tier without my weak aura. That would be impossible.
Bumpy road.
And the reality is, if you couldn't use that weak aura,
as long as you're prepared for a bumpy road,
would be designed or tuned differently. We would have ended up nerfing it right away or designing it differently over the course of even just PTR testing. And so that's like
I'd really hope they move to a more
grandstandy
visual style as well.
Will have to be built from the ground up
curve
with that in mind.
Aspect of
and I think it's making it a little bit more forgiving in a way that makes the challenge human rather than superhuman, as it often is when we're looking at like cutting edge, mythic tuned things.
Tindral was one of the last ones.
You guys are really good at the game, as it turns out, and we want to make a boss
if you think about some of the monumental
is going to pose a challenge and is going to take you dozens of attempts, let alone 100 plus to beat.
Yeah, like I really thought Gallius was going to be the black hand
not just
visual,
you, but every mythic raid build that's going to follow in your footsteps are going to be using these tools.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think players do want challenging bosses. That if we just tuned the boss around none of those things, players used all those tools, and they went in.
Illidan
a late mythic boss was dying in a single night for like
spectacle is
cutting edge build,
a big part of raiding
500 or whatever. That probably doesn't match what they're looking to get out of mythic raiding, in my estimation. And so like our goal is to keep the same overall level of challenge, while paring down the complexity a little bit.
Even if you look at the history of bosses this would have affected, you actually, even looking at Mythic Plus, something where the complexity has gone down from pack to pack in this patch, but the reality is you can still find challenge in it because it's infinitely scaling, and you will get to a point where it's doing too much damage to you, or the amount of damage you need to do is too high. There's been Mythic bosses that have been simple mechanically, but have been unbelievably difficult, and that's been true all the way down the guild ranks. It's not something that's just nerfed by gear, like Sludge Fist, Kaiveza, where you've created really intricate problems to solve where weak auras basically didn't matter. Halandris, you actually put a bomb timer very clearly in the game around the bomb. You did not need a weak aura for one of the hardest bosses ever, right? It's more just basically the solution for these weak auras has been just a very specific kind of assignment mechanic that is just like, oh, it's just so much easier to do this, right? You could build in a lot of that computational stuff in game to where even if weak auras existed, you would find people just being like, I don't know, the game just kind of does it. We have players that don't use audio sounds in weak aura packs because on bosses like Skarn, on most other bosses, there's like either an in-game sound for when the bombs are actually activating, or a voice line. We have 2 players in our guild that use very minimal weak auras, and they literally listen to voice lines for when mechanics are going to happen, and it's extremely accurate, right? So I think a lot of these things are already built into the baseline game. It's just about choosing like when and how to apply them.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think your example, going back to Nathri of Sludge Fist, I think is a great one, right? Like a lot of that was just practice and just learning like how to react to these situations when changing different partners and dodging all this stuff. And people were in enough situations over enough time They kind of develop that muscle memory, that sense of planning, and eventually your guild as a whole overcomes the challenge. Compared to, let's say, the Stone Legion generals that came after it, a couple of issues there, but like one of the central mechanics that was being solved by WeakAuras was like, all right, there's a whole bunch of soaks that need to be covered over the course of the fight, and it's not realistic to have that like 7 to 8 soaks up simultaneously, where you need to also account for like, well, this person just got targeted by different mechanics, so they need a backup to go in and do it for them.
Yeah, so it sounds initially like it's, we're restricting what add-ons can do, but really we're opening up the universe of mechanics that can exist in a WoW boss without, because there are so many that you could think of right now where all of them would be, this is going to get solved by this, right? This is going to get solved by this, but if that's not the answer, then now the designers have all these tools back, and we can get these mechanics that maybe haven't been used since WoW because we've been WeakAuring them ever since. And now we get to solve them with our brains again.
And he even mentioned too, he said like, well, there's a lot of swirlies now.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, like, we can always default to a few other things because you're not going to solve that with WeakAuras, so we can add fights where that's not a thing. But you remove that, that friction of there's too many swirlies goes away. And I think there's assignment, like doing a lot of these assignment bosses without a WeakAura that could work would be like really fun. Like it's fun to do that. It's fun when you have 5 people that need to soak something, like the last phase of Gallywix. There's a frontal on a side of a room and 2 people die. And right now WeakAura is just like, okay, well then we're gonna assign backup. So these 2 people get a big green thing on their screen, go soak that. That is something where that fight is spread out enough where you could actually communicate that. We need 2 people on the right to back up because 2 soakers are dead. Who can do it? This person says something, this person says something. Now obviously you're not gonna have that kind of communication like heroic and normal. Maybe you won't be in comms, whatever, but in Mythic, that's perfectly reasonable, right? A lot of the things, like we could probably count honestly on 1, maybe 2 hands over the last like 4 or 5 years how many bosses would you meaningfully would have to have a mechanic change, but they are very impactful, very memorable, and they have been purely defined by that. Are you worried at all about the communities, and this has certainly been ramping up over time, like you mentioned, even for us, we were much more just do the mechanic 4 or 5 years ago than we are now. Are you worried that there has been this built-in reliance on it that might be hard to shake when creating new raid bosses?
Baby steps.
Absolutely. And I think that some of that gets back to us knowing that we need to really ease into this, that any world where we just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, all right, have fun, honestly, we're in a new world, as opposed to building up more built-in functionality.
Who's distracting Dratnos?
Clearer visuals, simplify some mechanics.
I bet he's getting the nods to finish the interview.
And then building counters and to have classes designed around
I was
a world
saying,
where
Jay,
we know that
this is off the stuff, but when I was in this room with Ian and Holly and John, they had the guys behind, to tell me to turn off. So I sat with my back to them, so I couldn't see them telling me to stop talking. It was totally intentional. Me and Nupps set up the room in a way where they couldn't do that without walking on camera. So I could keep, because they kept trying to cut down the time I had with people. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to sit with my back to them. And then I could be like, oh, I didn't realize we got on that long. Or like, they could finish it or something like that. Tactical.
Possible.
Professional.
Yeah.
As long as people are set up for success, I think we'll be fine. Certainly, if we were to disable any functionality and then players went into a new tier and like, we're just wiping to bosses and like they used to clear heroic comfortably and now they're like brick walled halfway through heroic, yeah, players like that would be a source of tremendous frustration. But we know that we need to avoid that by any means possible, and we have a lot of work to do before we get there.
Something that really encourages me is the ping system.
Yeah.
That seems like such a perfect way to give us an option to identify where we're going, right? You can just ping where you're going, and then
the ping's great.
You don't have to try and communicate.
Especially for laughing
words.
at people who are doing
hey, I'm
crazy
going to move
things,
over
right?
to the
Like,
left
we
20
see it
yards,
used
right?
so
Just ping
much.
where I'm going, and
The fuck
that
are you
opens
doing?
up an ability to solve these.
It helps us when we're
YOLO
casting because they're all
style, right, rather
pinging
than
the
a-
bombs
I
in the
think your
room.
guild
No
did
one's
that.
so.
So the Echo of Neltharion, right?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just pinged it.
Yeah, so
Go for it,
famously,
yeah.
like, everyone had the maps for that. Like, here's your exact spot you go, and then his guild was like, you know what, everyone just ping your spot. Mostly it gets covered. People go to the same spot every pull. But if you see 2 pings in a spot, 1 person has to move, right? And that could largely solve a mechanic with just something that's already built into the game.
Yeah, I think and the ping system is something we've also talked about looking to improve and to like kind of broaden the sorts of things you can do with it to give people more tools to solve these problems in a coordinated way, but using their own skill and expression instead of another tool.
When I think of World of Warcraft, I'm always thinking back to when I first started playing the game, and there was this really exciting moment where I looked at it and I'm like, oh my god, I can I can make this game look however I want, right? Like I can put this here, I can have an add-on that tells me what time it is in London, what time it is in Darnassus, right? I can have all the world clocks there if I want.
Nerd.
I can have 3 different bars at the bottom of my screen. I can do whatever I want
Why
there.
would that be the first
to
thing
me,
you
that's
bring
always
up,
been a strength,
Granos,
not a
about
weakness
your
of WoW.
custom UI?
So I think there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that, but then there's also people that they hear about Blizzard thinking about restricting add-ons and they're worried about losing that. Is there any intention to go after any of that kind of customization?
Okay, this is kind of
question.
Not
babysitting
whatsoever.
stuff.
And in fact, we're doing everything we can to, and we would do everything we can down the line to
game was
minimize
built for
any
having
collateral
your own
damage to them.
UI.
But the goal is
From day one.
anything that's cosmetic should be completely fair game.
Yeah.
All informational stuff that's out of combat, like again, you have RP add-ons, help things that are tracking, helping with professions, tracking gathering nodes, helping you with quests, like you name it, a bunch of accessibility
This is
add-ons,
not
all
fluff,
of
because
those. Like,
people,
there's
here's the
nothing,
problem
No,
with all this stuff.
A lot of people will want to know this.
A lot of people want to know this because when we talk about this stuff, and believe me, I did it for years and I run into this every day. People hear what they want to hear and it's usually negative. So when they say they're restricting some add-ons, I guarantee you a ton of people heard they're not letting us use add-ons anymore. That's what they heard. Even though it wasn't what was said, that's what they heard, and that's what they'll take away with it. And I am sure you're seeing that on fucking various forums and shit like that. Is if you don't clarify the absolute basic shit, people just assume that the sky is falling all the fucking time. It's such a pain in the ass because you're like, nobody said that. And they're like, yeah, but that's what you meant. I'm like, well, no. I meant what we talked about. I don't understand.
Harmful whatsoever about any of them. The only thing is, at the very end of the day, once we feel like we've done enough on our end to improve baseline functionality, what we'd be looking at is the ability to parse real-time combat events in a way that drives, problem solving on the fly.
So it's kind of, we build the scaffolding to then be able to take away the existing WeCore solutions that we
poor
have for
WeCore
these.
is getting blasted,
How
dude.
much of this is... So the thing that's excited me also about edit mode has been, it's so clearly based on what the community has learned over 20 years, right? It's like, oh, the community has revolved around this as a solution for presenting this information. Let's give them that
This is
space in
solid
the UI
UI.
rather than making them download something.
This is perfect.
How much of this
I
initiative
would not have
is
any,
Perfect.
no
still
notes.
going to be based on what
No
the community
notes.
says, how the community reacts versus which
fact,
of
it
these
should
things
be
are
more in
already
the middle
kind
of the
locked
screen.
in
Yeah, my
decisions.
reply email when I was sent that
Basically
picture was,
nothing
this
here
is fucking
locked
gold.
in.
I have no notes.
Really, my hope today is to kind of begin a conversation about that direction and what areas are welcome, what areas maybe have more to do to convince the community on, and what areas we might be wrong on and should, reconsider. Because I think at the end of the day, this game belongs first and foremost to our millions of players. We're trying to serve them as best we can in the long run. And I think our sense is that for many players, the feeling that they have to download and use certain add-ons in order to play the game competitively isn't really part of what's attractive about the game or healthy in the long run. And so if we can pull things back to a place where add-ons are available for those who want to use them, but people aren't feeling
This is
pressured
such a
by
gentle
their groups,
nudge
by
to where
just
they're going,
the
'cause
natural
it's gonna be pretty
demands of
severe, I'm
competition
telling
and
you
not
now.
wanting to lose out to someone who's using more advantages, then that's going to be the healthier route in the long run.
So if I was the kind of person who wanted to write a 10-paragraph forum manifesto, this would be one of the topics to do it on.
Manifesto.
Right?
Absolutely. We'll be reading, we'll be
What a
listening.
dick.
I think this is a long path
such a
ahead.
dick.
Max is
And,
trying to
yeah, just
put it
Yeah,
together.
because he's
curious
such
to
a
kick off the
dick.
conversation.
Can I write a
and
manifesto
hear how people feel
on
about
this?
it. So Rotation Assist
Essaying?
is coming in 11.1.7, which is going to be hitting the PTR in the very near future. Can't wait to hear people's feedback as they're able to hop on and check it out. We'll be listening closely so we can make it the best it can be for everybody. It's also been amazing to just get a chance to talk through kind of the history of add-ons in WoW, where they are today, and where they might be going in the future. Thank you guys for coming out. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here. Really looking forward to see what the community has to say about how much they want more of these casts, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly,
They really
weekly,
had to
whatever
reshoot
you guys
that.
think, put it in the comments.
Daily, just
Daily, and
yeah.
you said it, it's not me. Thank you so much, Liz. It's been really, really awesome.
I
can't believe Dratnos didn't drop a who asked on Ian. I bet he was dying
Oh,
too. He always
he did, it
slides
got
it in
cut.
somewhere. Yeah, I mean, they did cut that end thing, so whether he fluffed something or he did go like, who asked, like, he did it to me like 20 times, the motherfucker. No sign-off from Max. Unlucky. I mean, obviously the last bit of that was more like damage control for what's about to happen. What's your general vibe?
Okay, I'm gonna make a really lame comment here, but how cool is this? Like, it was actually so nice to see Dranos and Max sit down and kind of talk to them like that, and even Ian saying, you know, I watched your raid leader and watched the race to world first. I think that kind of interaction between the devs and the community, to the extent that it is now, is just a really nice thing, and I think it is kind of showing in the game in more recent times and the direction they're heading in. In terms of the actual topic, I suppose the one button rotation thing, I suppose I'm not the biggest fan of, because I don't actually think that that helps you learn and it makes you reliant on something. I think that can negatively impact you in the long run. The rotation helper, I think, is going to be a really, really excellent kind of newer casual player tool for people to make the game less overwhelming and help them out as they grow and learn with the game. And if they want to improve, they just build upon, you know, their knowledge. I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing. And I suppose the level that they're playing at, they don't need. They're not in a mythic raid, or they're not going to be using it in a mythic raid. So, you know,
Yeah, they wouldn't
that's really
survive
the
in that
content where it's going to
environment
matter.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd like. There's two topics, I guess, that came out of this. One is the rotation helpers, the two versions of that, and the other one is the pulling back on add-ons. So we'll get to the other one in a second. But I'm with you a little bit. I think accessibility, great. One button helper is perfect for those people. I think the moment of friction will come when, I think it's the fear that you're feeling as well, is like certain people are going to just default to it. Any new players might default to it because it's just doing things for you while you're learning the basics of the game, and doing things along those lines. My personal feeling is those players are unlikely to ever be something that you should worry about, because they're not going to probably want to get better. Like, there's no way you're playing with the one button helper and thinking that you're good at the game. Ideally, I'm sure somebody does, because they probably top the damage meter at some point. But it's more a case of like, this shouldn't impact your day-to-day play if you want to play in the higher end. I don't think you might have occasional bumps into those guys, but for the people who just want to, like I say, play casually and don't give a shit about performance or trying to top the meters or trying to min-max every spellcast, which is a huge amount of players, I think it's going to be fine for them. The same with the rotation helper. I think it is good for alts. They have got an issue there, Jay, of how quickly you can have a capped alt that is going to be expected to go into a dungeon, and you can boost it, for fuck's sake. You know what I mean? You could just end up with it. And I think a little thing we did a few years ago was how many people boosted a character because you get it free with like expansions and whatever, and then just never played it after the first couple of days because they just didn't know what the fuck they were doing. Like, it was pointless.
there's that. And there's also like having less time, right? You come home from work, or you've got maybe a small window where you can play a bit of an alt, but you haven't done, as I said earlier, you haven't done all this extensive research into, oh, how do I know what talents to play? And then what's my rotation? So it kind of just allows you to play the game in the small amount of time that you have. And you're not negatively impacting anyone else either, because you're not playing in the level of content where you using this rotation helper or the one button is going to cause problems with somebody else. I mean, unless you're doing like a weekly 10 key in a dungeon and somehow this add-on makes you play worse. I just think the people who are going to be using this are probably not pressing their buttons right anyway, so it's going to be an improvement.
Yeah.
It's like LFR kind of situation, maybe, and you can build on your knowledge. I think it's a good kind of entry point.
I wish I could find the video of a workshop I did once. I know it was on a rogue, and about 5 minutes into it, half the chat was saying this person's clearly a bot, because observing the gameplay, it was so horrifically bad that it didn't make sense. And the question I then posed to the chat is like, how do we know this isn't a bot? And I said, the evidence is here why this isn't a bot. And it didn't take long for people to realize a bot would play better. Like, unironically, a bot would be playing better than what we're seeing here from the human. And there are a lot of players like that who just don't really fucking care. They like the world, they like the bosses, they like the big raids with lots of people around, and they want all those things. And if they get a little helping hand, that's great. I think if I go back to what my main goal with World of Warcraft content creation always was, which was encourage people to move up the ladder, right? And we all want that, because we've all shared in those moments of overcoming something very difficult in World of Warcraft, be it a mythic boss or, you know, a high mythic score. or whatever, a Mythic Plus score, or whatever your goal is. And this might cause that problem where players become reliant on rotation helpers or whatever, which doesn't work in that environment. We both know that, and a lot of people probably listening to this know that does not work. You need to be able to anticipate and respond and react, and a rotation helper is not going to assist you with that and cause those problems, where breaking that habit could be difficult. Like if you were to look at a set of scales with this, and on the left it's like this makes it harder to transition to more difficult content, or makes it easier because you're going to learn muscle memory and fundamentals of how your class works, and then you can add to that. Where would you place your stone on that scale? Is it going to make it harder to make that transition, or is using rotation helper going to increase your muscle memory and spell awareness so it's easier to make that transition? Where would you place your stone?
Oh, I think as long as you can play the game to an extent, I just think people are not necessarily, the people who are going to use the rotation helper are not necessarily going to be in level of the content where you're making those extra decisions anyway. I like, this is me gathering my thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's rightly pointed out. I'm pretty sure if this is the first thing that they're introducing into this, I think this is way more widespread than any of us would probably guess. Like we guessed earlier, right? Some people are making astronomical guesses. Like rotation helpers, I imagine, if they're looking at this and this is the first... They're introducing this before a damage meter, right? If you think about the or boss mods for their own bosses that they designed, they know the exact timers. They are introducing this feature first, which makes me think that it is just prevalent all over the place. Like a lot of the players are using it, not the ones who are necessarily watching Twitch or, you know, checking into guides on YouTube or things like that, but the larger, wider player base that, like you said, is coming home playing some WoW for a couple of hours before I put the kids to bed. I mean, it's a 20-year-old game. There's a lot of older gamers, right? And these are people who have moved on and doing other more serious adulty things than they were when they were students. You know, you think about JB sat in that fucking closet starting his Blood Legion raid, so now, you know, married, 2 kids, you know what I mean, doing all those things. They're probably fine with a rotation helper. I imagine a lot of people are using it far more than they want, and I do not super care about it, if I'm being honest. I think it's probably already there. It's already entrenched, but I want people, always encourage people to try and do the harder stuff and to get better and to find that joy that I found in, like, oh, I knew exactly when this boss was about to spawn tombs on all the players, so I know if I time my blizzard right now, I could drop a blizzard right on the position just that millisecond before I get tombed, and I AoE not only myself but my friends out and raise my damage profile. Like, those moments when you are so in the zone on how a boss works are, for me, are like orgasmic. Like, they're so good. Like, I fucking nailed that. And I helped out, and I wasn't hoping I wouldn't get tombed. I planned to be tombed and to counter it and to be in the right position. Like, those moments, or like a damage, make it simpler, a damage amp window. My cooldowns are ready, but I know if I wait just that 10 seconds, I could do 40% more damage, and I'm all ready and set up for it. I've pooled my resources. Frostmage style. I've saved my procs. I am ready to drop a fucking glacier on the glacial spike, guaranteed crits with cooldowns right on this motherfucker the second that window starts, and proc a ton. That feeling, so good.
Yeah,
and that's
I think skill
lost.
expression is so important. Like, having that knowledge of your spec and encounter and being able to make decisions like that always feels really rewarding and really, really good. So I love skill expression, and I love that kind of that depth to like thinking things like that. Even with the ignite or double on-use trinket fire mage in BFA, a lot of people would kind of send their combust during the damage window, but really your damage is the ignite that was burning after it. So really you kind of wanted to do your combust window just before the vulnerable window, so that your ignite, like that juiced up ignite dot, was then ticking on the boss during kind of the damage window. So you'd have to time it slightly perfectly, really. And it's stuff like that that feels really rewarding. And I don't think you should ever lose that, because that's the sad thing that I think with Black Mage in FF14, for example, losing the Enochian timer window. You kind of lose a lot of the skill expression with Black Mage, and it's kind of now you're just pressing buttons in the order every single time. And I played Black Mage just because I did really enjoy that. And I would be sad for that to be lost in WoW, because I do think WoW does that really well, even if it is a little bit too far in one direction where it's a little bit too convoluted. But I do like skill expression. I do think that matters in an MMO. I don't think everything should just be handed to you. I do think playing the game and kind of seeing that skill show is good.
Yeah, it's difficult to. That's that transition I'm talking about. I ultimately don't think it's going to affect too many people. I worry about that small subset who's like, I'm ready to do something more. I crave something more. Because we get that in drama time a lot. It's like, I played for a couple of years. I had a guild every now and again, but it was a cesspool guild that wasn't really doing anything. And then I tried raiding out in, say, normal mode or even Raid Finder. And then I was like, oh, this is my jam. I love this. And I want to go to heroic. Is if that whole... Everything you've been taught with like a rotation helper is difficult to break. But I think that's going to be a very small subset of people who might commit to them. I think overall it's going to be wildly popular. I do wonder, I imagine you're not going to be able to tell outwardly if someone's doing this, but you certainly will in a group environment because things just won't be right, or they'd just be considered a bad player. Is it if I do worry about toxicity in WoW a little bit, where if you tell people, oh, I've been using the rotation helper, or, you know, like, the raid leader's like, your damage just seems off, or whatever, from the damage meter. And it creates an almost Wrath Baby scenario. We'll have to see how that plays out, as whether they become like these, you know, they become a target, as if you admit to do it, or whether people... It'll be interesting, because WoW does have that issue of trying to point at people and say, I'm better than you. And if they have another reason, because we saw it recently, right, with your passes being added to tooltips for people, if you had it, is like, oh my god, this is just another thing to point out you're not very good, and see how that goes, whether it'll rate it up. I don't know. On the other side, this is, I mean, for me, this is the first step that they're removing a lot of weak aura functionality from raids, and we're going to see raid boss design change. It's probably going to be over the course of the World Soul Saga. We might not even see dramatic shifts. If we snapshot, say, Undermine, and then we compare it to whatever the final raiders of Last Titan, we might be looking at very dramatically different boss fights, although we have already seen weak or less required bosses. What do you think overall about scaling that back and moving? I'm not saying they're going to move to an FF14 style, and for anybody who's not played 14, 14 is supposed to be done with no add-ons, supposed to, quotes, at all. But it does allow them to create bosses with much more visual cues, much more complex visual cues, much more problem solving within their fights. WoW is obviously going in a very different direction because it's combat focused, and they've had this arms race with add-ons for years now. What are your first thoughts on scaling that back for going for more visual clarity and boss design route?
I think that opening a means to have a lot more options for mechanics that they can implement, and even having visual phases of the boss is just going to make things cooler, right? You're just adding more things that they can work with, that can't necessarily be solved but can really, really fun. So there are a few fights in 14 where it would be solved, that like a kind of the way that the mechanics line up. Trying to think of an example. Maybe Lights Rampant on Shiva would be a good example.
I think Limit Cut in general is a good one, because Limit Cut requires...
Oh yeah, Limit Cut.
Limit Cut's such a good thing to manage.
Yeah, it's a complicated mechanic where you have to play, right? Mm-hmm. And if you had a weak aura, the weak aura would just kind of tell you, right, you're going to go stand there, and like it would just solve that whole convoluted web of a mechanic, because it would break it down, tell you to stand there, and that's basically what you're doing. But those moments can be really, really cool when you're raiding. So yeah, if you kind of stripping that back in WoW, it can add more, fun encounters, but fun in terms of intricacy or difficulty or different styles of mechanics. I do like reactive gameplay. That is one thing that I've learned from playing 14. I feel like 14 has a lot of memory-based stuff that does get me a lot of the time because I'm quite a reactive gamer. I do like that in WoW. So I wouldn't want them to necessarily fully move away, that you have to kind of look at what hand what hand is glowing of the boss to know that side of the room is going to get cleaved, because I struggle with that sometimes.
I was going to say, they change it. WoW has so far to me never been good at, and I would argue that they've also not had the option to demonstrate this yet, so they might actually be exceptional at it and we just don't know. They've never been able to present a problem to me with a World of Warcraft encounter that I've not been able to solve immediately. I can't think of a single time that we've seen a mechanic happen in World of Warcraft that you're like, oh, that's what we're supposed to do. Like, immediately. You know, certainly to sit down and be like, okay, how are we going to do this? Now, sometimes we come up with many different solutions. So a great example would be, we could go with Roger Brown's cook on Kai'Veza, which I think it might have been me and you casting that and watching at it. Dark Animus is pretty close. Dark Animus took a little bit of thinking to get going. But you know, there's a lot of ways we can really min-max the hell out of this. Like, the obvious solution is obvious, but like, how can we do it to maintain like 100% uptime and things like that? But I would be very happy to see them try and come up with like, okay, maybe not a trios mechanic. I know we're using a lot of FF14 terminology here, but it's like, okay, here's trios. What the fuck do we do here with this, this, and this? And we have to scroll back through the VODs, because I don't think that's really a good thing for WoW either. With the combat focus that they have, but some problem solving based on visual cues I would be interested to see, and see where they can push that style of boss fight, which is like, okay, it's not just soak, right? It's, you know, you got your basics, right? You got soak, you've got fucking
Spread.
Soak, spread, turn it away, face
Bombs.
away, line of sight, you know, the basic things that a lot of things boil down to. I'd like to call, I mean, Protean's it would be interesting. Like, if Protean mechanics are not difficult to do once you understand what's going to happen, but Proteans with positioning could be interesting to see. They've actually got to pull stuff like that off. That isn't solved with a weak aura. Like, Archimon lasers, again, yes, they're solved with a weak aura, but it's not like we didn't know what to do the immediate when we saw, I think it's called Wrath, or Chains of Wrath, or whatever the fuck it was called. You know what I mean? Have we seen a mechanic happen in a boss fight in a while where you're like, oh, okay, I see what it is. Oh, this is a bait, right? Oh, you run away. It's got drop-off damage. You run away. The tank runs away. You know what I'm saying? Like, actual, like, okay, this is a tricky problem that we need to solve involving different levels of debuffs like you brought up earlier. We've got, like, okay, everybody's got a debuff, but they've, like, 5 of you have this one, 5 of you have this one, 5 of you have this one, and 5 of you have this one with all different timers. The most we see is kind of like what we saw with Kong and Godzilla and the Undermine, which is like, some of you are red, some of you are blue. Oh, spread out, right? You know, you go to the outside and you attack that one. And you deal with those things. Like, usually they keep that very simple, and I think part of that is because weak auras would obviously solve it if they made it more complex. And now they could roll it back a little bit, and hopefully that'll open some design doors for them. That would be cool to see. Cool. Optimal is different, right, than Progress. Optimal is a little bit different, especially if you make it more complex. But I would like to see something, especially if it's not assigned, because that is the advantage, again, in stuff like 14 and Guild Wars, is that, oh, we understand the mechanics. So we look to Shiva Savage kiting the ball. But depending on where you got the ball and what number you had, that was a different solution as to how you maneuvered the ball into position, right? And everybody had to know this different thing. And we see it with Omega. Omega Ultimate's first phase is like, there was a swapping depending on numbers and assigned. Healers would rotate and swapped around at different times. All those kind of elements, which is like, okay, we get that we grasp the mechanic, but actually there's like a number of ways this is going to solve depending on which players you have. And like Dratdos brought up is like, pinging is a way of doing it. I'm going here, I'm going there. Players coming up with those ideas rather than just, oh, okay, we feed this into the weak aura and get it solved. I hope we see some evidence of this over the next couple of years, that it's actually working. But overall, I'm kind of happy with them pulling it back. Let's strip this back down again. It's gone too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty good. Overall, I think that was a very positive thing. There are definitely some things to be concerned about. Rightfully so. But overall, I'm pretty happy with what they're doing here. This seems pretty good.
Yeah.
This is where we find out after everyone hates this, Jay, and like
I mean, again, yeah, the one button thing I'm not a fan of, but I the accessibility function of a rotation helper when you've got less time, you're playing alts, I think is only a good thing. And you can always build upon your knowledge, you can always build upon your skills, and it's a good kind of starting point. It's a good entry point to then take, you know, your rotation further as you move up the ladder and you kind of improve in what you're doing. You're then kind of adding to your rotation knowledge as you go up. And, you know, if people want to just stick and use the rotation helper, people are doing that anyway.
Yep.
They're not moving up on the ladder in terms of difficulty. So, you know, the content that they're playing at, they can, you know, use this rotation helper and clear the content and be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, the one button thing, I'm just like, you're just not really learning the game. You're not learning the different spells. You're just pressing the one button. Again, this is if you have a disability, accessibility reasons, I totally understand it. I'm talking about kind of the wider audience. I'm not a fan of the one button thing, but we have had it in the past where one button macros exist. Like some people have
It has happened in the
macroed
past.
an
Yeah.
entire opener to a one button macro. So this is just like, it's not unheard of.
I'm more these days. If I could say this, right? That's my. If I was, what year is it? 5 years ago, me, I think I'd be furious about the one button thing. Like genuinely, really, really upset about the one button thing. And,
I suppose, how does it impact people though? Like
That's
if somebody
where I
is
am
using
now.
the one button thing, why does it
older me.
how does it affect other people?
Correct. That's where I am now, 5 years later, and being less fucking more flexible, I guess, in my opinion on it. Like 5 years later, I'm like, this doesn't bother me. I don't give a shit if little Timmy or whoever is buying his mythic gear, which is happening every day. So his gear and item level or whatever is higher than mine, and he's using a one button macro and running around dungeons and fucking smashing things to bits. I don't care. That doesn't affect my enjoyment whatsoever. Like, my fun comes from playing with my friends in a raid or doing Mythic Plus with and pushing where that stuff doesn't work, right? That's where my joy comes from. My joy comes from an environment where Timmy with his one button macro wouldn't last 5 minutes. Like, it just wouldn't work. So I'm not arsed that this person is doing that in any way. My only concern, like you pointed out, is like, if these people ever want to get better and go and try something, is they're going to be left with a really horrible habit of playing maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And we've seen this in drama time. Some people don't actually start hitting their stride in World of Warcraft for several years, and all they've ever known is to press 1 on their keyboard. And that's it. And it's like, now I want to try doing something a bit better. It's like, well, you might as well just throw those 4 years in the toilet, because you actually have no idea what you're doing. You have no fucking clue what any of your spells do, because all you've been looking at for the last few years is a picture changing on a single macro. And you've never read what that does. You don't know what's happening with any of your spec, and you're basically starting from square one. And they might feel very upset that the game has kind of led them in that direction. You know, they might feel that that's the thing that's happening. But I don't think
because
that
if the game is telling you to press that button, that must be what you're supposed to do, right?
I bet
Because like
they
a
don't
new
market
player
it.
or a casual is not going to know all the nuances and all the
Yeah.
extra thinking that goes into it. So it's like, oh, well, the game is telling me to press these in this order. That must be what I need to do. That's how you can kind of cement yourself in that.
Yeah. I mean, it's also one of the reasons they don't allow a lot of content to be queuable, is because they're going to give all this functionality to players, and if they stick it in, if they then said, oh no, Mythic Plus is queuable or whatever, then you would have a problem, I think. Like, you do need to have those barriers of entry at some point, otherwise then you're going to have a problem, because it's the same thing we had with LFD being released. For those of you who were there during Wrath of the Lich King when it actually came in, is like, we got exposed to a lot of players we had no fucking idea existed and how bad they were. Genuinely, like, it was weird. Like, it was strange. It was like, who the fuck are all these people and where did they come from? Because there's millions of people playing World of Warcraft that you never interact with because they're not in your space, right? Everybody occupies a different space within the game of wherever you play, be it mythic, heroic, normal, or whatever, and you're not exposed to these other elements. And then suddenly the LFD came out, and you were like, where the fuck did all these guys come from? Because they're terrible. They're like really, really bad, and I don't know what's going on. And these players are out there, and it's fine. I'm not shitting on them because they played in their section. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to be like blocking people off, but it's like, you're in your world, I'm in my world, and WoW's so big that everybody occupies these different spaces, and they within their space. When you mix them all together, that's when you get a problem. That's when you get a lot of friction, because it's like, this is not how we should do things. So from that element, I think it's fine. I really don't care about anybody wanting to use this. I do worry about people wanting to get better, which I think that could be a problem. Because again, path of least resistance, we've seen it every single time. If it's just easier to not do something, you're not going to do it. Like, a lot of players are going to do that. I'll be interested to see the feedback after a while of whether you think a lot of players will go to this over what they've been doing. You know what I mean? Even with a rotation helper, like, this is easier than rotation helper. Like, what's the point? I can see the mindset, Jay, of what's the point in a rotation helper if it does it in one button? Because the rotation helper is telling me to press the lit up buttons, but the one button thing is pressing those lit up buttons for me as well. So what's the point in me following the rotation helper, right?
That's true. I think weirdly, my first initial gut instinct is that the people who are going to be using this, the majority of people who are going to be using this, right, are going to be people who probably don't even have their correct cooldowns on their bars, who might be clicking, who don't have, or not just clicking, but I'm just talking about all the different kind of inefficiencies in the way that people can play, right? Just kind of adding together. I actually think maybe the rotation helper being in the default game at that level is actually maybe going to improve their experience and maybe improve what they're doing as well, like on alts or people who have less time on their mains. I think at that level it might actually improve that like margin of players. Because they at least might be pressing. Like, do you know how many people don't have like certain buttons on their bars, for example? Like, they don't have certain buttons. They don't have even their cooldowns or know what their cooldowns are. I just think that having this kind of in the base game is going to improve that very, very like little level there. It's just, again, rotation helpers can teach you a lot of bad habits. So it's kind of breaking through that. But that already exists. That problem already exists because you have people who click, and you should keybind your buttons. It's way more efficient to press a keybind than it is to click. But that doesn't stop people from clicking, right?
No.
And if they do want to retrain their brain and their muscle memory, they have to go through that process of training themselves to click a keybind. So that kind of already exists.
It does.
I don't think this is introducing something new.
It's not. It's really not. People are saying like, oh, but do you remember it's got a 0.2 increased GCD on the one button macro? People won't care, guys. Like, at all.
Yeah.
Anybody who's playing the game knowing they're just going to have to press 1 while being able to look at the other screen or watch a movie or do whatever, they're not going to give a shit about it. You can't say somebody who cares about performance is going to be the same person using a one button macro to do things. They're not the same people. Like anybody who cares about a 0.2 GCD increase are not going to be those same people. Those aren't the people who want to learn, though. I think we need to stress a little bit that at least the way they're presenting this, I agree it is ropey, is that the one button thing is supposed to be for accessibility reasons for people who have issues playing. The fear that we're obviously all sharing is like, well, and rightfully so, I think, is like, well, I get that, and that's great for those people, but at the same time, people are going to use this just so they can farm and do whatever and do all that kind of shit with it. Yes, that is the thing.
That should be fine.
But again, that shouldn't interfere with you. I would worry about getting upset on behalf of someone else. Like, I would ask yourself, how does this affect me? Really? And I imagine for most people here, it doesn't, like, at all, in any way, shape, or form. It's just that we see in the future, this could lead to a problem, potentially, where there's a lot of people who are missing from your heroic raids. Like, the pool's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and what that could do. But high end is already very niche. WoW is a casual first game, the combat focused casual first game, and it always will be. So it'll be interesting to see what the next few years look like. I personally don't think this is going to change too much. I really don't. If anything, you might see some improvement in some random players that you're going to see.
Thing, like, honestly, at that level, I think it's only going to improve those people. Like, maybe you'll see people doing some damage in LFR, for example.
Yeah.
But people who are going to be doing, the higher content where you start impacting each other, maybe weekly no leavers. I mean, they're hell anyway, right? Pugging is already hell. But maybe people will be pressing their buttons in a semi-correct order than they were before. But yeah, as you're going to go up, the people are not going to be using this, so it's not necessarily going to impact you, right?
No, I don't think so. Unless you're currently getting like super problematic issues with people like buying gear and stuff like that on a daily basis, not the one-off guy you bump into your dungeon. I don't think it's going to change too much. It'd be interesting to see. Like I said, I think a few years ago I would have been kind of outraged by the one button thing. Like this, okay, you're because you can easily say, and I think that's the point of view of some of the people here as well. You're basically killing any chance of real progress for new players, because they're going to find out at some point there's this one button thing that plays your class for you, essentially. There's a bit of a damage loss, and it's like those people are never, ever going to reach the pool of people that I want for my raids or for my groups and things like that. They're just like instantly being cut off in a way, because you're not going to learn how to do so many things. The vice versa might be true if we look at it in a positive way. It might be a case of that gets them through leveling, gets them to dungeons, and then they're like, oh, I kind of now need to start learning. And they have actually a sort of stepping stool, which is like, okay, I'm going to stop doing the one button thing and start using the rotation helper, see where that goes, get used to pressing different buttons, and now I can start learning other things. Like, there could be a positive spin on this where they actually graduate. If the desire is there, they want to get better, they want to do things, where they do actually have stepping stones to get where they're going, rather than just being sort of left in the lurch. That might happen for some people, maybe. I don't know. Maybe. What game have you played, though, where you're excited to only play because it's one button? I don't. This isn't for me. Like, let's be honest. This is not for me, and it's not for Jordan either. Like, and I imagine it's not for many of you guys here. This is not appealing to me in any way, shape, or form, because I know how horrendously bad your performance would be using a one-button thing, right? Like, no, that's not for me. However, there are a lot of people playing ARPGs who work their arse off and play thousands of hours to get their gameplay down to a single button, and will do that forevermore in a big, big way, and get very upset if they have to press more than one fucking button. Like, very, very upset if they can't just hold down their button and run in circles. Like, there's a lot of people who don't mind that kind of gameplay. Not just PoE, lots of ARPGs work that way. But so it's different for everybody. Is this for me? No, fuck no. The idea of a one-button helper for my gameplay, hell no. Like, that's why I can see meme videos from big content creators. I can see that. Like, what is my damage? I can already see the video title. I took my mythic geared character to the boss with the one-button macro, and I beat everybody on the damage meter. Because that will happen, by the way. Yes, because if you have enough gear in WoW, passively auto-attacking will do more damage than somebody trying really hard. That will fucking happen. So that stuff, yeah, one-button raid boss. I killed it with one button.
One-button Gallywix. I mean, that's probably doable with Gallywix.
Right, but those aren't the people it's designed for either. Like, it's not a functionality I'm after, but I also don't think it affects me in any meaningful way. I do worry that people will just default to it. I think that sucks. Like Jordan's saying, they're just going to default to it and have a fucking mountain to climb if they ever want to do something better. Maybe it'll help them get there, because right now the only help you're getting is from third-party content creators, right? You're going to your Discords, you're going to your favorite streamer who's playing your class. I mean, you've had this experience, Jay. It's like people come to you with Frostmage questions and blah, blah, blah. I had it for years and years with all the classes. It's like, can you help me with this and that? So that's still there. That's not going away. So hopefully there will be ways of getting out of it. It just might be much harder to break out of habits, because you've learned literally nothing.